The girl with incredibly light, wheat-like hair woke up and immediately grabbed her head because it hurt a lot. At that moment, a servant immediately ran up to her. She turned to the saint and asked if she was really feeling ill. The girl suddenly raised her head and saw this lady. She immediately recognized that it was Annie. She was a minor character who practically didn't even have a name in the novel. The maid said in a trembling voice that in the last few days of their relationship, her girlfriend kept asking her what her name was. It even seemed to her that the girl did not understand what was happening around her, so she was very worried about her. But the girl smiled and said that everything was fine. She was already feeling much better, so she didn't have to worry about it at all. She herself thought that she had to behave as naturally as possible so that no one would suspect anything. Annie asked if the lady was hungry. After all, if she was unwell, she would ask for dinner to be served directly to the bedroom and to do so immediately. She explained that the saint should not have gone to the banquet on the occasion of His Highness's birthday in such a state. It would have been much better. The maid sighed heavily and said that, unfortunately, the high priest had already sent her a dress. She was even interested in how much it cost, because it was very sad that the girl would not be able to wear it. The saint herself thought that the real Ariel would definitely be in a panic because she would not be able to congratulate the prince personally, but the girl was not her, so she reacted calmly. She told her maid that everything was indeed fine and also asked that she be ordered to bring lunch because she was indeed a little hungry. However, she asked to be served without the salad, and the maid smiled and immediately said that of course it would be that way since the girl had never eaten it, so there was no point in it. She then left the room and said that she would immediately bring everything to Ariel. While she sat on the bed and tried to think about the whole situation, the girl realized that she had truly become Ariel. She had sapphire eyes and a young face. In fact, in her past life, she read one novel that we were torn apart by, The Return of Saint Camilla. This novel will tell you a story about the life of the righteous Saint Camilla. She was supported by 3 handsome men from different walks of life, and they not only supported her, but even worshipped this girl. That is, it was the so-called harem in reverse. And they all eventually became just her husbands, of course. When the girl who moved into Ariel's body read this novel for the first time, she was very amazed. She did not expect to see such an ending at all, and eventually she moved into this novel. Her mother was a simple baroness, and Ariel herself was an illegitimate child. That's why they treated her as if she didn't exist at all. She didn't believe in gods and always went to the temple. Ariel prayed to marry someone of good birth, and one day she was noticed by the high priest Rayhouse himself. He brought her to the Temple of Elysium, and after 2 years, she began to diligently fulfill her role as a saint. In order to maintain political stability, Crown Prince Kyle and High Priest Rayhouse came up with the role of the terminally ill Saint Ariel. The girl knew that when the real saint appeared, it would be easy to get rid of her, but she still believed that Rayhouse would be able to protect her. She also secretly adored Prince Kyle with all her heart and was a villain who envied Camilla because of her status. Camilla forgave Ariel, but she still tried to kill her as soon as she raised the dagger. She was pierced by 3 swords. And without even having time to scream, Ariel simply died. When the girl read this novel, she was undoubtedly incredibly happy about her death. However, now that she found herself in the body of this young girl, she realized that this was now her fate, and she certainly did not want to die. Ariel still remembered how she died in her past life, so she assumed that she was stuck in this place because her body was dead. And this meant that she would remain in the body of this character until the end of her life, and there was simply no way back. Being an illegitimate child of a noble family, she barely saved up for her own house and began to live independently. However, literally a year later, Ariel simply died. The girl, knowing this whole story, of course, was unhappy because she knew that this was what was expected of her if she did not change anything. When she woke up, she immediately went to the window and, opening it, the girl felt how fresh air began to envelop her entire body and fill the room. The girl thought that only the living could enjoy this beautiful air when she felt how death squeezed her heart with bony fingers. She realized that anything would be better than death. Compared to Ariel's past life, she still liked this world more. Everything in this place wasn't so bad except for the bad ending that awaited her. The girl smiled, stretched, and thought that if she didn't follow the plot, she could easily change the future, and then everything would be fine. She was reborn to the point of no return. Ariel was not interested in those who love another, and she certainly did not want to be a saint, and that meant that there was still a lot of time ahead. So it was best for her to focus on studying this world in detail in order to think of a good plan. When Camilla appears, she will simply give up her place to her, leave the temple, buy herself a house, and live the way she wants. Ariel knew that there was no point in denying reality. It was just a waste of time and her life. So since Ariel was now the villain of this story, she could only control her future. At that moment, a small notice suddenly appeared in front of her. It said that a wonderful journey awaited the child who accepted his destiny. And when the girl read about this, she was very surprised. She did not understand at all what it was, but then she received several more notifications. It was written there that those who existed from the beginning of time, who were already bored with this world, became interested in her abilities. Ariel immediately thought about these words. She had already reread this message a long time ago and read it several times with different intonations and speeds, but she still could not understand what it was about. She tried to understand what abilities were being talked about there, but she just couldn't do it. And after some time, this message simply disappeared. Ariel even at some point assumed that she was simply sleeping, and that was why she was seeing such strange things. But before she could do anything else, there was suddenly a knock on her door. After that, the door opened and Ariel saw a tall blonde man. She realized that it was not Annie, the maid who was supposed to bring her lunch. The man suddenly said that he brought her lunch, and then Ariel realized who this man was. She looked at him carefully and recognized him. This man was Reichhaus de El. He was the high priest. Smiling happily, the man said that it was the first time she called him by name and it pleasantly surprised him. In fact, Ariel simply shouted his name out because she was very surprised. Then she suddenly became a little embarrassed and realized that only these Camilla called other people by their names. Ariel always addressed him by his title. So she asked the high priest for forgiveness and said that she was just lost in thought and said all this without thinking. But Reichhaus suddenly said that he liked it, so she didn't have to apologize at all. And even on the contrary, she could continue to call him that. As soon as Ariel heard this, she was so surprised that she even asked again, "Was he really serious?" The high priest nodded his head in agreement and said that he had already forgotten his name because everyone called him only by his title. Therefore, if she wanted, she could continue to address him like that. The girl did not respond to this. She thought about this proposal. Ariel knew that her real character would have beamed with happiness upon hearing this. However, she felt that she shouldn't cross the line. So she told Reichhaus that it was best to watch yourself. You can't treat the high priest so disrespectfully anymore. So she was forced to refuse his offer. After all, the girl was not the real Ariel, so she thought that this would be the best thing. Smiling, she also said that such a mistake would not happen again, so he did not need to worry. The high priest, meanwhile, smiled back at her and said that, as he had already said, from now on, her home was in this place, so she could feel free and calm. As soon as Ariel heard these words and saw his soft smile, she thought that he was very kind and polite. Everything was just as he was described in the book. However, Reichhaus suddenly said that he could give her everything she wanted. The girls only had to ask. However, also remember that with freedom came responsibility. This is exactly how it was in the story of Camilla. When Camilla became a saint, she still communicated with him only by name. But the high priest is almost as influential as the members of the imperial family. It was he who brought Ariel to the sanctuary and forced her to play this role. In response to his words, the girl smiled and said that, of course, she understood all this perfectly well and would never forget about it. The man started to leave, and before that he said that he was very sorry that she refused to call him by his name. However, unfortunately, he could not do anything about it. Ariel, of course, saw the smile on his face, but she felt like he was putting pressure on her. So she simply bowed and thanked him for the meal. The girl thought that he knew perfectly well that she was not a saint, so it was best not to anger him. The man was about to walk out the door when he suddenly remembered something. Reichhaus turned to her and said that they had not seen each other for only a few days. However, he had a feeling that she had become not herself. Ariel knew she had to be even more careful so that no one would suspect anything. So when their next lesson came, she tried to act naturally. When the class finally ended, she stretched, straightening her back, and thought that they had worked out really well. At least the last conversation with Reichhaus didn't go so badly, so she didn't get upset. In the last few days, she had learned what year it was with the founding of the empire. This meant that there were still 5 years left before Camilla appeared. Ariel found herself in the Empire of the Elite, where both monks and clergy were equally revered. The majority of the population were believers, and the sanctuary of the main gods was located everywhere. Estus, god of justice. Hesed, god of knowledge, Odysseus. Bogolubi, Monta, god of art. Ciel, god of destruction. Omna, god of mercy, Kairos. God of death. Bellatrix, goddess of lies, Raid. God of infinity. All these gods people worshipped. In that world, there were only 9 gods, and the Elium temple where she was located at that time was a place of worship for all of them together. Elion was the most special of the temples. The saint was born there, and only there could all the gods be worshipped. Therefore, it was the religious center of the empire. The girl who came to the library to study a little more information began to leaf through it and thought that something would be said there about the prophecy. When one of the 9 gods decides to share his wisdom, the saint will see a prophecy. What the prophecy was could be read in absolutely any book. It was publicly available information. A glowing blue square with a prophecy engraved on it appears before the eyes of the saint. After some time, it disappears. The words are always imprinted on the saint's heart. And all this because people will not catch the language of the gods. Also, Ariel remembered that in the book, there was a scene when Camilla used the so-called divine power. But there was still no mention of this in other sources. In any case, the girl thought that it did not concern her at all. She thought that it would be best to read something more useful for her. The Imperial Library was supposed to contain a large number of books, so she needed to read as many of them as possible. Ariel was actually lucky. After all, she just had a pass. And no one really went to this place, so it was a great place to hide and explore this world in more detail. She also took a few blank sheets of paper for herself and decided to plan her entire life. Monthly expenses for maintenance were written down there, basically something like a salary. After that, she was going to add it all up and convert it into won. After that, she got a certain amount and even the temple provided for her completely. And it turns out that when Camilla replaces her, she will be able to live comfortably until old age because it turns out she had quite a lot of money. Of course, Ariel was very happy to hear this. She also thought that if she could sell all the trinkets that the nobility brought, she would get even more. Ariel from the book spent all the money as soon as she received it. However, the girl who moved into her body was a completely different person. Therefore, she was developed in financial literacy. Accordingly, Ariel thought that as soon as she saved up for a house, she would immediately leave the temple in order to start developing her own life. And while she was sitting and thinking about all this, she again heard a rather strange sound not far from her, which meant that she had received some kind of notification again. Turning towards Ariel, she actually saw a pop-up notification. It said that those who have existed since the beginning of time who were bored with this world were interested in her notes. Of course I did. After reading about this, the girl was very surprised. She didn't expect this to happen again. She also didn't understand why she was receiving such messages. It was all strange and suspicious because Ariel was in a novel and not in a computer game, but when she tried to even touch this sign, her hand just went through it. She suggested that perhaps because she had moved to this place, something had even changed in the whole world. But Ariel didn't have time to develop this thought because someone knocked on her door and she immediately allowed them to enter. It was her kind maid Annie. She brought the mistress some tea because it was already quite late. Smiling, she also greeted the mistress. Ariel thought that she had arrived just in time, so, turning to the maid, she pointed back towards the sign and asked if she could see it too. The maid, who saw nothing behind the mistress except the bookshelves, was very wary of such questions. That's why she didn't tell Saint that apparently she still hadn't greeted her, so she would have advised her to go back to bed. But Ariel was a little upset, although she understood that she shouldn't have expected anything at all. It was obvious that the maid wouldn't see anything. Annie came closer to her and, handing her some tea, said that in this state she would not be able to begin her duties. As soon as Ariel heard this tone from the maid, she immediately became wary. She thought that the maid was saying something very strange. The girl thought about the fact that in fact for several days she had only eaten, slept, and read. And Camilla constantly made a pilgrimage, met with priests, and showed herself to people. The girl actually even organized meetings with the emperor and the crown prince himself. However, Ariel believed that since she was not a saint, nothing was required of her accordingly. She has to hide behind illness in order to explain why she does not appear in temples and shrines. However, she knew the truth that she was a real imposter, and she will never be able to fulfill the duties of a saint, no matter how much this is required of her. Then, suddenly, after a short silence, Annie turned to the lady because she still wanted to tell her something. She asked if the girl remembered that she had told her that her brother had fallen ill. She also learned that he had even had to get into large debts. Ultimately, he won't cope without her help. As soon as Ariel heard this phrase, she was very surprised because she didn't understand at all what the maid wanted from her by giving this information. But Annie eventually said that she felt very awkward asking for it. However, she wanted to know if the saint could give her a little raise. She would like just a little extra money to help her poor brother. Ariel was genuinely surprised to hear this request. She certainly didn't expect it. But as soon as she looked at her maid's evil smile, she immediately thought that this facial expression was very familiar to her. This is how those who wanted to take advantage of the girl actually smiled. Of course, she was only an illegitimate child, even though she was from a rich family. However, this sly grin was familiar to her even from her past life. In the book, the villain Ariel was quite compassionate. So Annie, who was condemned to be a servant for the rest of her life, decided to simply profit from her. But the girl who was in Ariel's body was certainly not her. and accordingly she certainly did not intend to act like her character. So, turning to the maid, she asked if she had ever given her money. Annie immediately became worried when she heard this question, and in a trembling voice she said that the girl had certainly helped her out a lot when she agreed to help her brother, and also asked why she suddenly decided to ask about this. But Ariel did not answer this question. She only sat back down on the chair and asked how much she paid her. The girl then named her amount and replied that she was not asking for much, she just thought that another small amount on top of her existing salary would be nice. As soon as Ariel heard about this, she immediately became upset, because the maid's salary was half the amount that the girl paid her. Now she even understood why her character was always so poor and couldn't save money normally. So Ariel decided to stand up for herself. She turned to the maid and said that, apparently, Ta had completely forgotten her place. She also said that she was very sorry, but she was not in a good mood that day. So she advised Annie to think carefully before opening her mouth again, and for now, it was best for her to listen to her. Ariel said that from today on she would not give her a single coin. As the saint's maid, she already received a very good salary, so she was surprised that she asked for more. As soon as Annie heard about this, she became very indignant and was about to yell because of her emotions. But the lady interrupted her. The girl told her that since she was so worried about her brother, it would be best to bring him to the estate. Their stables were short of hands, and she would be able to negotiate so that he would be accommodated and given the necessary medications. The maid at that moment was already beside herself with anger. Of course, she always thought that Ariel was much worse than her, and therefore did not expect such a refusal in her direction. The girl knew very well about such persons as her maid. She constantly encountered them in her past life. Therefore, she did not understand how boldly the servant behaved so disrespectfully. She looked at the saint with such contempt. At that moment, the girl even wanted to just fire her. But then suddenly Annie still dared to confront her. She turned to the saint and said that apparently she had completely forgotten that she knew her secret very well. She said in a rough voice that Ariel was an imposter and ultimately expected some positive reaction from the saint. The lady herself, having heard about this, understood that Ariel paid her not out of pity or good intentions or her generosity. All these amounts were paid so much because they threatened to reveal her secret. So as soon as the girl heard the threat towards her, she was very shocked. Annie, at that moment, seeing her confused expression, thought that she finally had a privilege and said that if she told everyone who the girl really was, everything would go wrong. However, Ariel Rish said that she could do it calmly, and as soon as the maids heard about it, she was very surprised. In fact, the book Ariel would have continued to pay off this girl. Everything would have started with a salary increase, and eventually they would have reached a tidy sum. But now, the girl decided to do everything completely differently. She told the maid to tell everyone that Ariel was not. Saint Annie did not expect such an act from her mistress, so for a while she was even confused. She was about to say something, but the lady got ahead of her and said that it was certainly most likely that she would be executed. But, getting up from her seat, she asked what Annie thought they would do to the servant who knew everything and hid the truth only for money. She asked, what could happen to such a person? Annie certainly didn't expect such a blow in the back, so she was incredibly scared of what could happen next. The saint continued to dial in the meantime. She said that she was at least half a noblewoman and was going to die beautifully if something happened. But such a death was definitely not in danger for a simple servant who had broken many plans. She didn't immediately begin to resist. She screamed loudly and was about to say something, but the rail interrupted her again. She said that the girl was simply jealous of her, and, coming closer, added that since she had not found out the truth, she would have told her right away. However, now they were in the same boat. But then, with an evil smile on her face, the girl also asked Ella Annie if she was really ready to risk her life just for some small money. The girl at that moment even began to shake with fear because she did not expect such anger from the lady. After a short silence, Ariel also asked if her family also knew about everything. Annie immediately realized that she needed to save herself, even if she screamed loudly. She said that, in fact, no, she was the only one who knew her secret. Continuing to scream, she also said that her family had absolutely nothing to do with it, so she really wanted the girl not to hurt them. But Ariel, looking at her violent reaction, suddenly said that the girl did not convince her at all, so she was going to ask them about everything herself. Annie was very indignant when she heard about this. Of course, she didn't want things to get to this point. So she fell to her knees in front of her and began to ask for forgiveness for her arrogance. She said in a trembling voice that she no longer needed any money. She continued to ask for forgiveness and convinced the saint that such a thing would never happen again. Ariel just stood there and watched all this from above. But in reality, the girls found it so hard to believe that her character could allow them to use her. But the maid continued to scream. She begged the mistress to forgive her, and at that moment another person suddenly entered their room. The girls immediately turned around and then saw that it was the high priest. When the maid saw him, she became even more scared. She immediately ran up to him and said that he had misunderstood everything. She was about to explain something but did not have time, all because the man, without even letting her finish speaking, pierced her heart with his sword. There was a lot of blood spilled around. Rayhouse looked at the saint with his golden eyes, but he was silent for a while. And soon after this silence, he said that the circumstances left him no other choice. So he really hoped that she would understand his actions. Ariel understood perfectly well that Rayhouse probably reasoned this way about the fact that Eni had acted badly, and she should not have threatened to reveal the secret. He thought that there were absolutely no guarantees that she would not give him away. He did so, but the girl did not like this method. She believed that everything could have been done differently without bloodshed. Then suddenly the high priest, breaking their silence, said that he would clean up this place and the girl could go away and rest. Ariel was very shocked by this situation. So when the man walked out the door, she stood there completely motionless for some time. She thought that everything had gone completely differently than she had expected, and the problem was that he had actually done the right thing. Eni died without even having time to scream, and once the girl knew that a similar fate would await her, this made her even more afraid. But then suddenly a new notification came to her. Again, it said that those who existed from the beginning of time, who were bored with this world, were now interested in her thinking. They were also interested in her ability to reason and her calmness. Now she received a new notification that she was even closer to the prophecy. When the high priest left the library, he thought about the whole situation that he heard and that happened. In fact, he had never remembered the girl being so determined as this time. Before, Ariel always stood and endured how she was mocked, how they whispered behind her back, and how dirty rumors spread throughout the estate. She simply could not do anything about it. Therefore, he believed that if she had even a drop of brains, it would never have come to this. In fact, if the saints served all the gods, then the priests served one, and the priest Rayhouse served directly the god of art named Monty. So immediately after his crime, the man went to the statue of this god to atone for his sins. The next day, rumors spread throughout the estate about what had been done to Annie. Therefore, other maids, when they made even the smallest mistakes or oversights, were incredibly afraid of the mistress. When the maid made a mistake with the dinner, she bowed and asked her for forgiveness. She said that she would definitely be more careful and that it would not happen again. The girl tried to calm her down. She explained that nothing terrible had happened, so she didn't need to worry so much, but of course it didn't work. The maid was still scared to death, but Ariel eventually let her go, and the maid asked again and told her to call her if she needed anything. The girl did not understand why there was only fuss, and for some salad now, everyone was going crazy over any little thing. She was very tired of all this. The maids came and went so quickly that she didn't even have time to remember their names because they were all afraid and couldn't stay there for long. Ariel also believed that one should not forget the fact that she was in another world, and there, they treated human life differently. Annie died yesterday and everyone absolutely didn't care about her anymore. The girl was completely unaccustomed to this. For her, such behavior was completely unacceptable. She could perfectly well understand Rayhouse if it was revealed that the girl was an imposter. Then a real commotion would begin around. This would harm not only the emperor but the entire empire. However, the circumstances left her with no other choice, so Ariel had to accept the situation as it was. The girl believed that she needed to escape from this place as quickly as possible. The longer she waited, the less chance she had to survive. Annie was killed, but she was no different from her in reality. And besides, she was very confused by those idiotic dialogue boxes that said something about a prophecy. They were already boring her. They flashed before her eyes all the time. She sat down at her desk and opened the list where she wrote down the prices of two-story stores in the capital area. She knew that the big one would definitely be beyond her means at this stage of her life. If she sells all sorts of holy things, she will be able to afford at least an average one. And the relay from the book was very stupid and apathetic. If she hides well, then Rayhouse will even soon forget about her. Then suddenly the girl calculated one more moment and was very happy because this meant that she had only 3 years left. She did not have to give most of her salary to Annie. She would be able to save up for her dream. Suddenly, someone knocked on her door and she immediately became wary, not understanding who it could be since she was not expecting any visitors. But after the knock, the door opened and Rayhouse walked inside. The girl saw him and thought that it was him, because it was quite obvious. Ariel stood up from her seat, bowed, and wondered if he was even allowed to enter the saint's room without knocking. She didn't understand where his manners had gone, but she greeted him properly, and the man assumed that she had even decided to take care of etiquette. So he bowed to her and thanked her in return. After that, he turned his attention to the desk and the papers that lay there, smiling. Rayhouse asked if she had really decided to throw herself into her studies. The girl quickly began to cover her papers with her body so that he could not read what was written there. She was just calculating how much she needed to save for the store. If he sees it, he will guess about her plans and then it will definitely be the end for her. Therefore, Ariel immediately took the paper in her hands and said that he had come just in time. She wanted to show him something important. The man was very surprised by this and immediately asked what it could be. Ariel smiled and replied that tomorrow was His Highness's birthday, so she had prepared a speech for him and would like the man to express his opinion. Of course, Ariel wrote this speech. She didn't even think that this knowledge could be useful to her. But in the end, she handed over the piece of paper on which everything was written to the high priest. The man began to read out loud this congratulation. There was Ariel congratulating her beloved Prince Kyle on his birthday. How she wrote that he was born for love, and she was glad to feel his love. The love that 9 gods bequeathed to them. As soon as Ariel heard this congratulation, she even blushed. She didn't expect that her character could write such words. Of course, I understood perfectly well that the girl was a naive idiot. However, I didn't expect that everything was so bad, and there definitely shouldn't have been any justification for this. She was incredibly ashamed of all the words she heard, despite the fact that it wasn't even a girl who wrote them. Ariel immediately tried to snatch the piece of paper from the man's hands and said that she had decided that it would be best to redo it. But Ray House looked at her with a cruel look that was filled with anger and asked the girl if she really loved Kyle. As soon as Ariel heard this, she also became even more embarrassed. She immediately said that this was not true, but she could not come up with an excuse. After that, she noticed his stern look and immediately realized that he was thinking about the wrong love. The girl assumed that unrequited love was a very painful topic for Ariel, so she wrote such congratulations and suffered quite often. And after a short silence, the girl said that she loved him as the gods love their children. Love is God's mercy. But Ray House, continuing to have a cruel voice, said that Prince Kyle would still think about the wrong love and asked what would happen then. The girl did not understand at all why he suddenly became so worried. Ariel probably considered her speech an ordinary congratulation, but it is certainly possible that Kayla's prince will take her seriously, so the girl who was the original would definitely not change a single word. But even Ariel couldn't imagine how such a thing could be read in public. So she smiled and agreed with the man and said that the speech was too ambiguous. Therefore, it was best to rewrite it. Ray House also smiled and said that of course it was exactly like that, it was best not to mislead anyone. He also praised her and added that she was growing up right before our eyes. The girl took the forest from the paper and thanked him for it. In fact, she couldn't believe that he decided to praise her for such a trifle. But at that moment, the man suddenly dropped a piece of paper by accident. Ariel, of course, noticed this and immediately reached out to pick it up. But the girl didn't have time to do this because the man leaned down first to her feet and took the sheet of paper that he had accidentally knocked over. Then he looked straight into her eyes with his golden pupils and handed her the sheet of paper, but Ariel suddenly felt a rather hostile aura emanating from him. She took the sheet of paper and thanked him. She decided that it was best not to even look him in the eye so as not to feel awkward again. Ray House, at the same time also smiling a little, said that in that case they would see each other tomorrow morning. And in the meantime, she could rest. After the high priest left, Ariel decided to go to the library. She wanted to get that terrible moment of shame out of her head. The girl decided to focus on preparing for tomorrow's party. She needed some guidance, so she began to look over the shelves to pick up a book. But then, suddenly, passing by one of the bookshelves, she suddenly heard some strange sounds nearby, and she immediately became interested in what was happening there. Then Ariel looked in and saw that one of the young guys suddenly pressed a girl who served God against a shelf. She refused him and asked him to leave her alone. But this guy was self-confident and very cruel. He asked if God could somehow stop them from going to dinner at least once. He also drew attention to the fact that she was not even a nun yet. She had not yet been officially ordained, so she could quite feel free. But the girl said that it was all just a formality. Only her faith mattered, so she had to refuse him this. But the man continued to insist on his own. He said that they should at least go out for a drink. He asked her to stop being so pushy and was also ready to promise that it would be much more interesting than in the library. The girl then screamed loudly at him and said that if he didn't leave her alone now, she would go to the sanctuary, but she didn't have time to finish saying anything because Ariel appeared from around the corner. She turned to this rude man and told him to get away from her. She advised him to leave her alone and look for a girlfriend outside the temple. The guy just looked at her in surprise. He didn't understand what she wanted from him, so she continued to pester this future nun. But the girl was not going to stand on ceremony with him. She asked if he had really gone deaf, because she did not understand why, in that case, he did not come out. It was obvious that the young man was worried. He immediately said in a trembling voice that he did not understand what she was talking about. After all, they were just chatting, but Ariel replied that she did not think so, so she strongly recommended that he leave of his own free will. The girl, who was a nun, immediately screamed loudly and said that he was pestering her. So all the words he said were lies. But then the man suddenly shouted loudly and said that of course he was not bothering anyone, and also suggested that the alien was now recruiting just anyone. Now it became clear to him that they had all conspired to accuse him of harassment and to get as much money out of him as possible. Of course, the man was not happy with this. The girl immediately shouted loudly at him, asking what kind of nonsense he was talking about. After all, he himself invited her to have a drink. Ariel interrupted him and asked if she could find out where he was from. The man smiled smugly and said that of course he was a Hans from the Rajavis. In fact, the girl had never heard of such people, so she assumed that this family was not very famous. The man then said that since he had introduced himself, it was the girl's turn to introduce themselves as well, because it would be very impolite of them not to give their names in response. Then he smiled and said that he was ready to swear on his name to go to the sanctuary and personally tell the saint about the humiliation he had experienced. The maids, as soon as they heard this, immediately began to be indignant. They shouted loudly and asked Hans whether he even understood who was in front of him. However, Ariel stopped them and asked the girl who had been subjected to this terrible event to help him clarify something. Hans became even more angry and asked how she dared to ignore him, but Ariel continued to ignore him and asked the girl standing behind him to name those who could excommunicate him. So she wanted them to enlighten Hans. The girl was immediately happy. She said that she would definitely do it. After this, she explained that such power was possessed by the patriarch, the high priest, and of course the saint. Ariel said that everything was absolutely correct. The saint could excommunicate people from the church, and at the same time deprive them of their noble title. Hans did not understand what kind of jokes they were. They decided to joke with him. He also asked who would excommunicate him from the church. Did the girl really imagine herself a saint and think that she could do this? But Ariel began to come closer to him and said that he was wrong not to believe in all this. Then she grabbed his lips so hard that he couldn't even open them. And moving even closer to him, she looked at him with her big blue eyes and said that she was the saint. After that, she let him go. Hans did not understand how this was even possible. His voice trembled. He looked at the girl with caution and misunderstanding. But Ariel continued her story and said that she would also write a complaint against the Rageweed family. The man then panicked greatly. He understood what would happen if this happened. Gan immediately knelt down in front of her and began to ask for forgiveness. He said that he could not even imagine that she was a saint. Therefore, he was very sorry that she had to see all this. He also said that if he had known, he would certainly never have made such a monstrous mistake. He was incredibly ashamed of what happened. He begged her to forgive him, but Ariel then said in a rude voice that if he wanted her forgiveness, he had to deserve it. Hans replied that he was ready to do anything and asked what exactly he had to do to earn her forgiveness. She pointed to the girl he was talking to earlier and asked him to apologize to her. The man was even more worried. He said that he was just joking, so he didn't think she could take it all seriously. But Ariel wondered if he really meant to say that her eyes and the eyes of the 9 gods could be wrong. Hans understood that he simply had no choice, so turning to the girl, he also knelt down and asked her for forgiveness. Ariel assumed that the conflict was over for now, so she was happy with her job. Then the girl turned to one of the maids and asked her to bring her a collection of books on court etiquette. The maid immediately said that she would certainly do everything immediately. Then the girls suddenly received a new notification that those who had existed since the beginning of time and who were bored with this world were interested in her sense of justice this time. And also that they were extremely interested, and then the opportunity to receive the prophecy finally opened up. Paradariel finally got the last notification that said that she was the first person to be given this wonderful ability. The girl was genuinely surprised. She did not understand what prophecy was being discussed, but then the first level appeared in front of her, on which the names of all the gods were written. The girl was incredibly confused. She didn't understand at all what it was. So as quickly as possible, Ariel returned to her room, where they had already brought her the books she needed. Then she opened one of them and read that prophecy was a unique ability of the saint, and the girl assumed that somehow she was able to interest the gods. In fact, she was very tired of these notifications, as if some newfangled nightclub was opening that day, and this spam was constantly coming to her. Also, a new, seemingly game-like interface appeared in front of her. But what confused Ariel most was the fact that she shouldn't have had this. After all, she wasn't a saint. So she didn't understand where it came from at all. The girl opened the book and thought about the fact that the ability to receive a prophecy is an innate ability of the saint. However, it did not say anything about any exceptions. She received new notifications and wondered if she could somehow turn them off because they were incredibly distracting and irritating to her. Then suddenly, a screen appeared in front of her as if she had asked for it, and they decided to fulfill it. A notification appeared there asking whether she would like to turn off the prophecy function. But she started receiving a lot of notifications from the gods who panicked that she wanted to turn them off. And in the end, the girl had to promise them that she wouldn't do it. She had the feeling that these gods finally got the internet back, or they caught a radio wave on a desert island, and they were just bombarding her with messages, and because of this, she wanted to turn them off. No matter how much she wanted to, she would still have to put up with these prophecies because otherwise she was sure the gods would be angry with her, and then everything would go exactly wrong. But somehow it was still very strange for her, because in the end she was not a real saint. And so she did not understand why all this appeared to her so unexpectedly. But suddenly, a new notification appeared in front of her, which said that Kiset, the god of knowledge, wanted to show her something. She had to activate the sensor at that moment. Everything around Ariel lit up. She literally absorbed the contents of the books and felt that she was reading 100 books. At the same time, all this information entered her head. There were even those that were not in the library, for example, rules of conduct at the emperor's banquet, or a collection of congratulatory speeches for the court. She thought that now she definitely could not worry about anything at all. But then she received a new notification that her prophecy level was too low. Ariel was incredibly upset because this flow of information ended. She realized that her level was too low to be able to absorb all this knowledge and acquire new ones. Because of this, of course, she was upset. But in any case, she was also going to see what happened there, and the blessing of Hesed was revealed to her. Her head instantly seemed to become 1,000 times lighter as soon as she glanced at the book. And she had already absorbed the information that was spoken in it. She went to her notebook and very quickly began to write down the necessary information. Ariel was glad that this way things would go much faster. Of course, it all happened too suddenly. However, she assumed that she had been very lucky. So she decided to just take advantage of this opportunity. When the next morning came, Ariel felt incredibly cheerful. Her soul was like new. She read so much yesterday that she decided that she shouldn't forget about rest. So that day, she decided to take a little break from books. Ariel also noticed that this wonderful blessing of God lasted only 3 hours. She really liked that feeling when she grasped all the information on the fly. However, as soon as the effect wore off, everything returned to normal, and because of this, she felt a little sad. At that moment, there was suddenly a knock on her door, and she immediately allowed them to enter. It was the high priest. Entering the room, Rayhouse smiled happily and asked Ariel how I slept. The girl bowed, thanked him for his interest, and said that everything was just wonderful. The man noticed the number of books that stood on her desk and assumed that she had worked hard the previous evening. The girl agreed with him and said that after all she had to prepare a speech for the prince's birthday. So she couldn't disgrace the church, so she decided to prepare well for it. She knew that if she wanted to survive, she needed to behave sincerely and build good relationships with everyone. However, when she saw the strange expression on the high priest's face, she did not understand what had happened to him. She assumed that it was all because Ariel would definitely not have behaved in such a way and he acquired some doubts. Then the girl decided to get out of the situation. She turned to him and said that she was very sorry that, before she behaved like a child. Ariel apologized for this and said that she did not know how soon the real saint would appear. But until then, she would try not to cause him any more trouble. The girl thought that the best way to distract her would be through analysis herself. So she hoped that all this would work. However, Rayhouse suddenly told Ariel in an angry voice that he had already said earlier that this place was her home, and therefore he would like to never hear such a thing from her again. At that moment, she had a feeling that she, like him, didn't know his secret, and he definitely wouldn't be able to leave this place because he simply wouldn't let her go. But then suddenly, a soft smile appeared on his angry expression. He extended his hand forward and said that he would like to watch her new speech. She handed him a new sheet of paper with Gina's written speech. He read it silently for some time, and his facial expression changed several times. Ariel was very worried. She asked if something was wrong. The man immediately said that everything was fine. She didn't have to worry. He was just a little surprised that she actually gave a great speech. Thinking about it, Rayhouse also said that she had matured a lot during this time. He couldn't even believe that she had actually written it herself. The girl smiled happily and thought that in order to avoid suspicion, she had taken the speech from the book, and taking the sheet of paper back, she replied that she had simply copied it from the collection, changing it a little. Rayhouse replied that everything was clear to him. So it became completely unsurprising that it came out much better when the girl added something of her own. After that, he replied that he had recently heard that some kind of scandal had happened in the library and asked what had happened there in general. The girl immediately explained that she simply went to the library to prepare a congratulatory speech. Then she saw Hans pestering one of their followers. The girl explained that, as a saint, she had given him a warning, perhaps a little too much, but in any case she believed that he had learned his lesson. The high priest suddenly interrupted her and said that he had excommunicated Hans himself and his entire family from the church. He also asked that in the future, if something similar happened, she would immediately inform him. He was ready to deal with such cases and did not want her to interfere in them. Ariel was genuinely surprised. She didn't expect that he went and excommunicated them from the church. She believed that it was possible to resolve everything between Anna and Hans without involving outsiders. Then suddenly she received a new notification from the God of Knowledge. He asked the girl to beware of Rayhouse. He believed that he had a rotten soul. Then the God of Art also turned to Ariel. He claimed that the soul is not as important as appearance, but she did not listen to them. She did not understand why they decided to make a scandal out of nowhere, because nothing like that had happened yet. But the God of Knowledge believed that Monty was too superficial. At that moment, two windows appeared in front of the girl in which the gods were arguing, and she, of course, had to be distracted by this. Rayhouse noticed that she had a rather strange expression on her face and asked if she had really become ill. The girl, who was lost in her thoughts for some time, didn't even hear at first what exactly he said. When she asked again, she was still able to answer his question. Ariel replied that everything was fine with her. She was simply amazed by his determination. In her opinion, it is not so easy to get rid of rot. It is difficult to distinguish those who are impure in heart from simply lost souls. The man explained that other priests had condemned his decision. However, he suggested that Ariel thought differently. The girl smiled and said that she thought that he had acted truly fairly and always did so. At least when she read the book, she really thought so. Unlike the prince who pursued his own interests, Rayhouse decided to deceive the saint in order to calm the agitated people. For the villain Ariel, he was an executioner, but for Camilla, he was a real protector who could always be relied upon. The girl believed that even if she were reborn in Camilla's body, she would truly admire him very much. After these words, Rayhouse just stood there for a while and looked at her. After that, he turned around and asked for forgiveness for taking up her time. He wished her a bon appetit and said that he would come a little later. When he left the answer, the girl breathed a sigh of relief. She didn't understand why he suddenly changed his mood. At some point, it even seemed to her that she had said something wrong, and yet it still seemed to her that she had done quite well. So Ariel decided not to dwell on it. After the high priest left the room, he wondered when everything had changed. He could not understand it. She had blue eyes, and then he wondered why he hadn't noticed all this before. He didn't understand whether she always had such a sweet smile. In fact, Rayhouse hadn't noticed much in the girl. He chose her only because she was stupid and naive enough to fulfill her role without question. In the end, the high priest decided that it didn't matter how much she had changed. He had something else to worry about. At that moment, someone suddenly ran up behind him. He turned to his high priesthood and asked how he could understand this. This man was Heinz, the priest of the temple. He asked why the man didn't even consult with him after that incident in the library, but only made the decision himself. He said that even if the saint herself decided to excommunicate them from the church, he did not understand how a man could agree to such a thing. This definitely contradicted all the codes. Heinz continued to shout and said that it was impossible to excommunicate an entire family because of the misdeed of one of its members. And he also added that he, like the other priests, was categorically against this. But then suddenly Rayhouse turned to him and said that the man apparently misunderstood something. Sitting down in his place, he said that he had expelled them not because of any misconduct, but because they were involved in a conspiracy with some priests of their temple. He explained that one person told him that getting rid of rot is not easy. He also said that he did not agree, but in fact it only made him feel better. He was going to cut off all the rotten shoots and asked his father what he thought about this. Heinz, hearing this, was amazed for a while. He was silent. But then he said that he simply hoped that in the future the man would consult with him. After all, it was the right thing to do. Moreover, the Holy Lord did not fulfill her duties. He thought that she should not have used her power. He explained that the high priest had every right to decide such issues, but it was definitely not she who Rayhouse found unpleasant to hear, so he asked him to stop blaspheming. He said that they recently felt dark energy coming from the Ares mines and noticed an abnormal number of monsters there. Rayhouse said that when people have nothing to do, they fill their heads with all sorts of nonsense. So he decided to give the man a task. He had to go to the mine for a rest. As soon as the man heard about this, he was very sympathetic. He said that in that case, he didn't even know when he would be able to return and he should not leave the temple under any circumstances. And besides, he was already very old and weak. But Rayhouse interrupted him and said that he understood everything. However, he also could not contradict the order of the high priest. Therefore, he simply had no choice. After some time, the servant who had participated in that terrible rock was suddenly brought to Ariel. The girl was very surprised to see her and immediately asked why she had come. The maid explained that this girl insisted on an audience with her. She wanted to say something. Ariel replied that she had seen her in the library then, so she asked the girl what she wanted to tell her. With a trembling voice, she turned to the saint and asked her to allow her to serve her. Ariel asked her for forgiveness, but said that she did not need any more servants. Unlike ordinary maids, Anna enriched her with magic. It was dangerous to keep her near her, so she did not want her to remain her maid. But the girl said with despair in her voice that she didn't even have time to thank her that day. She really helped her out in the library. At that moment, tears suddenly appeared in her eyes, and she said in a trembling voice that she wanted to serve Ariel as a sign of her gratitude and loyalty. As soon as the saint heard this, she was very shocked. She was silent for a while and thought about what to do. At that very moment, she kicked out the maid who was standing nearby. Then she turned to Anna and said that not long ago, right before her eyes, a maid who had worked for her for quite a long time died. She asked Anna if the girl knew why this happened to her. Seeing her surprised expression, Ariel immediately said that it happened because she didn't know how to keep her mouth shut. Anna was horrified. She froze and looked at the saint without even blinking, not understanding what she was leading up to. But Ariel said that they had so much in common, and that's how it all ended. But she was nothing to her, and she asked if the girl really thought she could avoid the same fate. Anna just thought about it for a while. The girl assumed that she had scared her so much that she would definitely refuse it. But the girl suddenly screamed with confidence in her voice and said that she still wanted to serve her. The saint was very surprised to hear this, but the maid explained that she was an orphan, raised by her uncle. She was lucky to be in this place, but her life remained the same. She explained that she could never stand up for herself. She could only cry and beg to be left alone. But on the day when the incident happened in the library, a nobleman apologized to Anna for the first time. The girl seemed to illuminate her life with light. She would also like to become like Ariel, and that is why she decided to dare and ask for this position. She said that she was already destined to serve the gods forever, so she believed that it was best to dedicate her life to a wonderful person as a saint. Ariel was very surprised to hear this. No one had ever said such words to her, so she didn't even know how to react. Anna said that of course she was very afraid of dying without paying her back for this pond, so she was going to do everything in her power to survive and do what she wanted. In fact, in her past life, the girl herself tried to survive at any cost. Therefore, it was very strange for her to find herself in the opposite situation. For some time she thought about what to answer, and then said that while Anna was useful to her, no one would lay a finger on her. However, she could not guarantee the safety of her family. Ariel asked if she had definitely not changed her mind about it. The maid lit up with happiness. She smiled and said that of course she had not changed her mind. The next day, the girl had to go somewhere. Before the carriage, she was met by a young knight. He greeted the saint and bowed. The man said it was a great honor for him to accompany her. His name was Duane. He was the commander of the Second Army. The girl smiled happily and said that she was glad to meet Duane. In fact, she had been sitting idle for a long time. Now, they were on their way to the imperial palace for the banquet to celebrate the crown prince's birthday. When the girl got into the carriage and they drove some distance, Ariel was surprised because from the outside the temple turned out to be much larger than she thought. Even from the gate, it was quite a long ride. She thought that when she was going to leave this place, she would definitely need a horse. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to cope. There were stables next to the main building, so she thought that she needed to start learning to ride somehow in order to eventually put her plan into action. After they left for the city, Ariel was surrounded by people on all sides. They shouted her name, clapped their hands, and blessed her. Then the girl finally understood what it meant to be a saint. Everyone in the country revered and loved her because she carried the will of the gods. Ariel became curious whether the messages she received from time to time were really sent by the gods themselves. Then she received a notification from the god of knowledge who expressed his displeasure because the girl doubted them. But smiling, the saint said that she was not a real saint, so she could not simply believe him that they were real gods. She wanted proof. At that moment, she suddenly heard a loud sound coming from the street. It was thunder, and even lightning flashed past her. Ariel quickly turned to the side. She didn't understand where thunder and lightning could come from in the middle of a clear sky. The girl then realized that it was the work of the gods after all, so she said that she believed them and asked them to stop because she didn't like it. Then the girl began to think about something and saw that a question from the god of love appeared on the window. He was interested in why she began to smile so suddenly. The girl didn't answer this. She was able to check that they don't read minds. And because of this, she was very happy, because it was only to her advantage. From that moment, several hours passed, and closer to the evening, when the sun had already set beyond the horizon, they finally arrived at the imperial palace. As soon as she entered inside, she immediately noticed how everyone around her was openly looking at her. But in fact, this was nothing new to her, so she didn't dwell on it. The girl believed that she needed to raise her chin higher make her gait more confident and her gaze more decisive in order not to cause any doubts in them. After she walked forward, a whole orchestra began to play music. Ariel stopped in front of the throne on which the imperial family itself sat. The girl thought that in front of her were the emperor and empress themselves. The man's name was Yasin, and the girl was a Rose. She knew that Rosa and Lita were the daughters of Count Michel, and she became empress only 3 years ago. And next to the emperor, clutching the hilt of the sword, stood the crown prince himself, Kyle. It was a young, tall, muscular man. He had red hair and yellowish eyes. His gaze was unapproachable. As soon as Ariel came closer to them, she immediately bowed and said that it was an honor for her to congratulate His Highness on his 20th birthday. The emperor thanked the saint for this and said that she could calmly raise her head and talk to them. Ariel did just that. She knew that their relationship was so-so. However, she noticed that Kyle didn't even hide his hatred towards her on his face. The girl then turned to them and said that in the beginning of everything, God created the world and divided his power into 9 parts. His mercy fell upon the empire and made it prosperous. The brave emperor was rightfully chosen by the god of justice. The heir prince was born with the blessing of Ciel, the god of destruction, and being the most erudite person in the country. He helped her and established the rule of theocracy. Thus, the saint blessed the empire. She said that they were all under the protection of His Majesty and congratulated the only heir to His Imperial Highness, the Crown Prince, on his birthday. Raising her hands up, she extended them to the man and said that not only the god of destruction, but also the other 8 gods blessed him. For a while she just stood there, but when she didn't hear anything in response, she opened her eyes a little and realized that she was being incinerated with a look. Of course, she was very sorry that the man had to feel this way, but at that moment she was much worse than him. Therefore, she really hoped that he would soon calm down and stop looking at her like that. Then, after a short silence, the man finally extended his hand to her in response, and Ariel kissed it as a sign of her respect and greeting. Of course, she had to endure such humiliation and also in front of a huge crowd. She didn't like all this, but she simply had no choice. Ariel was happy that at least she didn't make any mistakes and didn't understand why the girl had to do something like that at all. For her, it was something strange. Then she glanced again at the prince. The man had already opened his mouth to tell her something. However, he did not have time to do so. Behind them, a loud explosion suddenly sounded. The rails were blown off her feet and she fell to the ground. After all, no one expected something like this. People around started screaming loudly. They were very scared after the blast wave passed and immediately started asking if everything was okay and if everyone was alive. Ariel tried to see through this smoke and debris what had happened. However, she could hardly see anything. She could only see a silhouette. Right in front of her stood the prince. He grabbed his sword and tried to defend her. Of course, Ariel was very surprised that Kyle decided to do this. The emperor then shouted loudly, asking what was going on. The knights ran up to them and said that it was all lightning that struck the statue of the first emperor. They had no idea where it came from at all. But eventually they noticed that the bronze statue was completely destroyed after the blow. The empress sighed heavily and said that this was a very bad sign and it clearly did not bode well. When the knights started walking around the hall and asking if there were any wounded or if everything was fine, they also tried to calm them down and told them to try to stay calm because they couldn't panic. Ariel approached the hole in the ceiling that was formed after this statue and did not understand how this could happen because there was not a single cloud in the sky, so it was very strange that lightning hit the statue. The girl immediately mentally turned to Cassette and asked if it was really his doing, and the Mott turned to yes. God of Art, he felt discomfort when she kissed the prince's hand. I'd only imagined how he sends lightning but did not want to do it at all. Ariel sighed heavily and realized that it was all his fault after all, and in the end, Hesset was even very upset because he was not guilty. However, he felt some kind of biased attitude towards himself. The guests, who were very shocked by what happened, immediately pointed their fingers at the saint and the prince and said that it was a very bad omen. The statue of the emperor was left in only fragments. If the crown prince took the throne, they thought that the empire would now be destroyed like this statue. As soon as Ariel looked at the prince, she had a rather strange feeling in her chest. She did not understand what it was and what it was connected with. However, she did not like it. But then suddenly, she heard the voice of the empress who, sighing, said that no one could even think of such a thing. The girl immediately turned around to look at her, and the woman laughed and replied that even the saint had honored them with her visit today. So, with some suspicion in her voice, she asked why the gods were so angry about this because everything should have been fine. Ariel at the same time assumed that she and the prince did not get along very well. However, this was not surprising because this woman was her father's new wife. So it was quite obvious that Kyle would behave in a similar manner. All the same, the situation remained quite dangerous. Everything happened right after her words. If Kyle harbors a grudge against her after this, it will definitely be very bad. As soon as Ariel stood up on her feet, the Emperor suddenly turned to her and said that it was a little humiliating. However, he would like to ask her for one favor. The man asked her to pray for the well-being of the Empire when she returned to the temple. Ariel smiled and immediately said that she would certainly convey to the gods that they were happy and that everything was fine with them. But Kyle, hearing about this, was very surprised, just like the Emperor himself. The man asked what the saint was talking about. The girl explained that His Highness was born under the star of Celia, the god of destruction. However, destruction and creation always went hand in hand. One could say that destruction is the mother of all things. As soon as the Empress heard these words, she did not understand at all what she was saying and even got angry at the girl, thinking that she was simply confusing their thoughts. But the Emperor caught the essence of her thoughts and asked if she really wanted to say that this was Celia's blessing and not a bad sign at all. As soon as people heard this assumption, they immediately applauded. They said that it was all really true and it was the action of divine power. No one was even hurt. So Ariel explained that God wanted to congratulate the prince so much that he couldn't even contain his joy. So, bowing again before Kyle, she congratulated him on his birthday, and then the main ceremony and banquet began. And so, a few hours later, when everything was finally over, the girl left the station banquet and thought that it was all literally like a bolt from the blue. The girl definitely decided that she would need to talk to the gods so that they would stop doing things like this because she definitely wouldn't be able to survive another such incident. And she also needed to understand what kind of relationship the prince had with the Empress, because it all seemed very strange and suspicious to her. Since all the incidents at the banquet were settled, she decided that she could calmly return. But then suddenly, approaching the carriage, she heard the prince's voice, who, stopping her, addressed the girl. As soon as Ariel turned to the side and saw Kyle, she was very surprised because she did not expect that he would want to follow her. The man said at the same time that the holiday had just begun and asked if it was true that she would not leave him on his birthday. Of course, this took the girl by surprise. She was so surprised that she couldn't even answer for a while. Ariel wondered what was wrong with this man because he was acting very suspiciously. So she stopped and asked if he really wanted to tell her something. Kyle replied that she was a little different from her usual self today, but the girl didn't show that it bothered her, and she only asked what exactly made her so different. She even wondered if he meant to convey the will of the gods or explain the lightning as a blessing. She said that solving such a problem alone was a very unusual decision, and he would not be surprised if someone said that she was a completely different person. The guy explained that at some point it seemed that way to him, but Ariel replied that her lifestyle was too idle, so she decided to change. For a while, Kyle looked at her with a stern gaze, trying to understand whether she was lying to him or not. But soon he spoke again and said, "Let's say that I believe you. Then you wouldn't mind explaining some points." The girl immediately asked what exactly he wanted to hear from her. Then Kyle began to take a letter out of his jacket. He said that he had recently received a letter from her with a proposal, and accordingly, it all left him a little confused. Ariel, hearing about the proposal, was very surprised herself. She could not believe that he could actually somehow have a letter with an offer. The man explained that he was really prepared for a lot from her side, but he did not imagine that she would be able to go so far. The girl herself did not understand how her character could do something like that before she entered her body. So for some time she did not even answer the man, because she simply did not know what to say in such situations. Kyle then looked at this letter and, sighing heavily, asked the girl if she had really forgotten about the saint's duty when she wrote it. Ariel thought that she needed to calm down and think, even though it looked like a marriage proposal. It was written in a rather childish way. So she didn't understand how he could respond positively to it, because it would be real stupidity. The girl thought about the fact that there were several options for how Kyle could answer. The first was a beautiful refusal. He could have said that he was very sorry, but he was not at all bothered by her loving lamentations. The second option was certainly a rude refusal. He could have taken out his sword and asked if the saint really wanted to die, since she had written something like that to him. In order to avoid such an awkward situation, Ariel decided that she first needed to somehow justify herself. So she calmly replied that it was just some kind of mistake and misunderstanding. I looked at her with distrust and asked if they had already done it, or if she was really saying that it was a mistake. The girl understood that he did not believe her, so she needed to come up with a more complete story. Ariel replied that alcohol was to blame for everything, because that day she drank too much and therefore could not control herself. She was out of her mind and wrote something like that, and even decided to send Kayla Ariel with her head down, and replied that she was very sorry that he had to go through something like that. She also said that she really hoped that he would be able to forget about this mistake since she helped him that day. The girl already wanted to say something else, but then suddenly heard Kyle's surprised voice, who asked if the mistake could really be so sincere in her opinion. At that moment, he began to quickly approach her and said that he was sincerely shocked because she missed me every night and wanted to see me. He put his hand on her lower lip and ran his thumb over it and said that she even wrote that she would be very happy if he accepted her proposal. He also said that she laid out everything in such detail that he was even a little embarrassed to read all this. Then, smiling, he asked Ariel if she had really managed to forget about everything so quickly. He began to approach her in order to kiss her, and Ariel was in a panic. She did not understand what to do now, and also why she wrote him something like that at all. The girl decided that she needed to immediately return to the temple while she still could. But in order to prevent the man from doing anything to her, she laughed nervously and said that she did not know what to answer him about this. Kyle then handed her the letter and said that it was a whole story of 8 pages. So he found it very hard to believe that she could have written it simply because she was drunk. Ariel decided to stick to her theory that she was drunk. So she said that she drank a whole barrel of wine and didn't even remember what she wrote. So she was very sorry that it all happened. The girl herself did not understand at all what her character was thinking as soon as he did this. But the prince smiled smugly and said that people actually become more honest when they are drunk. They start talking about their cherished desires. The girl immediately shook her trembling hands in refusal and replied that this definitely could not happen. At least in her case, it was not so. Having calmed down a bit, Ariel suggested that they just pretend that none of this had happened, and that she wanted today's blessing to be part of her apology. She asked him again for jewelry for upsetting him with such a letter and said that she would control herself in the future, and that this would never happen again. But Kyle suddenly interrupted her conversation and looked at her with hatred and asked if she was really laughing at him now. The girl certainly didn't expect to hear something like that, so she immediately asked what exactly he meant. But for some reason, the man grabbed her hand and, pulling her towards him, asked if she knew how many nights he had not slept after receiving this letter. Of course, after this, he felt very upset that Ariel just wanted to forget everything. He asked how she could say that alcohol was to blame for everything and didn't even remember anything. The girl was about to answer him something, but suddenly, not far from them, a rather large explosion occurred again. The guy and the girl couldn't stay on their feet. They fell to the ground but quickly got up again. Then they looked up to see what it was. Spruce noticed some drops of water above them and immediately realized that this was a great chance for her. She decided to take advantage of the moment when Kyle was distracted. She removed his hand from hers and immediately began to run towards the carriage. The man already wanted to run after her and shouted for her to stop, but Ariel ran very fast. Soon, she found herself at the carriage and turned their six to Dwayne, saying that it was an emergency and asking him to get inside immediately and they would leave. Of course, the man was very surprised by what she asked. However, he still carried out her order, and as soon as Ariel was in the carriage, she breathed a sigh of relief. She also looked at the Imperial Palace and saw that there was no one else on the horizon, so this calmed her down a lot. The girl thought that lightning really saved her. Then she got a notification window again and she asked if they really did that. She received a notification that the He-Seed had choked, but Ariel replied that it was quite obvious that they had not intervened, so this time she thanked them for it. The god of knowledge winked at her, and the god of love patted Hesed on the back and even praised him. After all, he really did a very good and fast job this time. Ariel at the same time held in her hands the letter that she had written. She squeezed it very tightly, and then she remembered everything that the man had said. Ariel's face immediately turned very red. She didn't understand why all this had happened to her. She felt so embarrassed that she got angry and even tore the letter into small pieces. She thought that because of Ariel's actions, everything had changed more than she thought, including because of that horrible proposal letter. Everything around was becoming very dangerous, so the girl had to try much harder. But for now, she was just going to run away and fly to the bottom. After this banquet, Ariel went to the auction a few days later. The host announced the next lot was a ceramic jug of Earl Balmer. He explained that it once contained holy water from the ancient temple of Eurus. He named his starting price and saw that some people immediately began to raise their numbers, raising this price to buy this lot. Ariel, who was sitting on the upper floors next to Dwayne, did not understand at all why she was there at all. She did not see any point in it. However, this was the will of Monte Godsard, so when her knight asked what they were doing there, she answered as such. In fact, such stories happen from time to time. The trinkets bought at auction turn out to be treasures, thanks to the person who bought them becoming a real millionaire, even though he could have had losses before. But Ariel wasn't going to leave everything to chance. The god of art had to help her, and then they would do it together, and she would be able to get rich. As soon as a valuable item appeared, she knew what Monta would tell her, so she could choose the most profitable deal for herself and not bother. Here, finally, the auctioneer announced the next lot was the thing of Countess Altmater. It was a majestic dagger. A notification from the god of art immediately appeared in front of the girl. He looked at this dagger and was carefully going to listen to what the man would say. And the auctioneer said the following: "It is made of bronze and dragon bones." They say that this simple blade contains divine power. Things made from dragon bones are actually very rare. Ariel at that time even heard how the girls who were sitting in front of her began to whisper. They thought that their content was not that great. They thought that it contained very little divine power. So they did not want to buy it because they thought that it would just be a deception. The girl agreed with them because in this world they use the same tricks of adding small parts of something valuable to a product as in her life. However, for some reason, Monty looked very closely at this dagger. Then the auctioneer immediately named his amount, and the girl, hearing it, quickly raised her hand and named a higher amount. Ariel was surprised that it happened so quickly, but God continued to look at the dagger. She tried to hurry him up, because that way the amount would rise even higher and she wouldn't even have time to make her bet. And now, finally, a new notification appeared in front of her that the god of art directly wanted to receive this dagger. So the girl immediately raised her number and named the price. No one wanted to raise the price because everyone thought it wasn't worth it. So the dagger was sold to Ariel. The girl told her assistant that everything happened very excitingly, but the man was amazed that she decided to make such a choice. He really did not understand what was so valuable about it, but the girl did not answer him. She only smiled and said that she still needed to do something, so she suggested that they leave already. She explained that it would not take much time. Therefore, having picked up their goods, they went to the city. Ariel arrived at the right destination. As soon as the man saw this place, he was very amazed. He did not expect that she would really want to come to such an establishment. They were standing next to the Merchants Guild, but Ariel explained that everything was correct. She was not mistaken at all, and they needed to go there. In fact, this merchant guild was called Lloyd. She clearly remembered that the most influential owner of the guild in the empire was one of the three main male characters. His name was Kos. He was also the heir of one of the largest guilds. He was the only one who did not have a connection with Ariel, so girls definitely would not want to cross paths with him. However, as soon as she entered this trading guild, she immediately remembered that the most talented appraisers were there, so she simply could not pass by. As soon as she entered, one of the workers immediately approached her and asked how he could help her. The girl pointed to her dagger and said that she had one thing to sell. She believed that she should use everything she could just to get what she wanted, so nothing could stop her. Ariel handed him the dagger and said that she would like to get an appraisal of it. Of course, she couldn't tell by its appearance whether it was expensive or not. However, it was believed that God would not lie, so she didn't worry too much. The appraiser replied that if she was not going to sell it, after the appraisal, he was ready to take 5 francs for the work and asked if that amount was acceptable to her. The girl did not object. She was even pleasantly surprised, because she thought that it could have cost her even much more. The man, meanwhile, took the product in his hands and began to carefully examine it. While he was doing his job, Ariel looked around and saw large shelves that were filled with really very precious things. I thought that even their assortment was on a completely different level. Professionalism really was felt even in such small details. Finally, when the man finished his work, he said that it was a very good specimen, quite a high content of precious bones. As soon as the girl heard this, she simply beamed with joy. She was very happy that God had not let her down after all. After that, with a smile on her face, she asked how much this dagger cost. The man replied that it was not very worn out and that the dragon bones were also valuable to him. So it could have been a sum of around 300 francs. When Ariel heard this amount, she lit up with happiness. It really was a very good deal. But her assistant approached her and asked how she could even know that this thing was so expensive, because he would never have even thought that it could cost that much. Ariel of the city smiled and said that God told her all this, after which she made a deal with the man and sold this dagger. The man thanked her for this deal and also said that now he would bring the money. So she had to wait a little. At that moment, Ariel heard a strange sound behind her, and looking back she saw that she had received a new notification, which said that the girl had accumulated wealth with God's help and that the store function was now unlocked for her. After this happened, Ariel returned to the estate and soon Anna came to her. In fact, she was not in the city all this time because she left for several days to train to serve her. And when everything was finally finished, Anna returned to the estate, and therefore she ran up to the lady, took her by the hand, and said that she could rely on her. She said that she would definitely try to do everything as it should be, and so that the mistress would be proud of having such a wonderful servant. Then Ariel replied that she should bring her violet pie and apple tea. The maid immediately ran out of the room and said that she would do all this immediately. Anna thanked her all the time and talked about how grateful she was to her. At that moment, the girl thought that in fact it was all not bad. It was as if she had a younger sister who idolized her all the time. After that, she sat down at her desk and decided to figure out the store function that was unlocked. The girl thought that she had to figure out what this meant and what opportunities she would now have, because she thought that this could be very useful for her. In fact, the first thing that Ariel learned in this place as soon as she arrived was that she could speak with the gods through prophecy. Due to her low level, not all the gods could speak to her in response, but with their help, Ariel was able to improve her abilities through blessings and inspiration. Monty could also help her with the auction. And now, after some time, she has unlocked a new ability. This ability was a store. She said this word, and immediately several different pop-up windows with items opened in front of her. As soon as she saw all this, she was very amazed. But in fact, during this time she had already managed to get used to the windows in the form of a game chat. Therefore, she really liked to see what was in front of her. She received a notification that she could use the store and receive a reward when she opened it. Ariel couldn't even imagine that in this world there could be such wonderful scales for her. Unfortunately, only one low-level item was opened, but there were also many blocked ones. She thought she needed to check everything. After she looked at her account, she saw that the currency was francs. This made her happy. If they were francs, that meant they were no different from real money, and if Ariel didn't have them, then the store was certainly of no use to her. Then suddenly another pop-up window appeared in front of her. In it, the girl was asked whether she wanted to receive a reward for opening the store. The girl, of course, was going to do this. She was also interested in how to put the money, namely where to use this store. Soon she was given a multifunctional bag for visiting this store. This thing literally materialized in front of her hands. She felt this bag and realized that her reward, unfortunately, was not money, which would definitely have come into her hand. It was interesting how this small bag could differ from an ordinary bag because at first glance there was nothing special there. But then suddenly an idea came to Ariel's mind and she decided to test it. The girl took her bag of money that she received after selling the blade and poured all the gold coins into a new bag. After that, she looked up and saw that her account was now replenished. She realized that with the help of this thing, she could add her money to the account and buy things in that store. In fact, she threw a lot of coins into this bag, but its weight remained exactly the same, and so Ariel assumed that in the future this would be very useful. So she was happy. The replenishment problem was solved. However, when she looked closely at the store, she noticed that many items were still blocked. She assumed that this was due to the low level of prophecy. At least simple items and small potions could be bought at such a low level, and this already made Ariel happy. She looked at the first level potion that was supposed to give her a little strength and realized that it wasn't particularly useful. However, it still had to fulfill its function. Ariel knew that if she could level up, she would unlock better things. She definitely needed more different items to make it easier to function in this world. And this meant that she had only one thing left. She had to put all her savings in this place in order to fulfill her goal. Soon after the gods saw her enthusiasm, they consulted and decided to entrust her with a secret mission. Ariel was very interested when she heard this, and all because the reward was unknown, but she had hope that it would be money. The secret mission was for the girl to prove her faith by collecting money from people. As soon as she understood this, she immediately began to doubt, because it could mean many things. And at that moment, she received a notification that she could donate all the money from the multifunctional bag. Of course, Ariel didn't like all this. She thought that the gods had already gone too far with this, but they ignored her, believing that she had to make the decision herself. The girl thought that even if they knew how difficult it was to hide this money from Ray House, they would still probably demand that they give it back, because they were pursuing some kind of goal in all of this. However, these gods always helped her, although sometimes they behaved as if they were little children, but they were still not bad. And they even helped her in some situations, so Ariel believed that they would definitely not advise her to do something that would harm her. That's right. Ariel finally agreed to give everything, and soon the bag suddenly flew into the air and lit up. And after that, she didn't have a single franc left in her account. The girl was very upset, but she did not grieve for long because she knew that she would be able to earn money again. She believed that she was simply paying for their help in this way. But then suddenly she received a notification from the gods. It was written that Ariel had proven her sincere faith by giving the most important thing at the moment. Therefore, the three gods consulted and decided to share their divine power with her. Her body was chosen as the receptacle of pure divine power. Everything around Ariel lit up, and she literally felt how divine power began to enter her. She felt so warm, as if she were sitting by the fireplace, and all this energy penetrated her body. She felt this divine power with every fingertip. After it all ended, Ariel looked at her hands and couldn't believe that she no longer felt anything. The girl didn't notice any changes at all, but the gods began to congratulate her on the discovery and receipt of divine power. In fact, These abilities turned out to be more exciting than the previous blessings because of the high said, all her thoughts finally came into order. The interior, which had previously seemed luxurious to her, now looked ordinary. She assumed that this was precisely Monty's intervention. However, now every flaw in the chandelier really cut her eyes, and this irritated her very much. She assumed that she would need to develop the ability to ignore it. But Ariel had no way of verifying what blessings she had received from Odysseus, the god of love. She didn't even have a boyfriend, and she didn't really know love, so she decided that his blessing definitely wasn't particularly useful and didn't dwell on it. It was still strange because flowers could only use the limited power of a specific god, but with Ariel, everything was completely different now. She had the use of divine power without limits. In fact, the only person in history who was capable of this was Bergadita. But Ariel did not understand why in that case she was given exactly this power. Soon someone suddenly knocked on her door. The girl allowed me to enter, and at the same time she continued to think and I, the character, was a fake saint without any abilities. When the main character appears, she will need to make room. However, this power that was now in her gave the girl even more doubts. She was in despair and did not understand at all what was happening. The girl sat at her desk and was ready to just burst into tears. Out of hopelessness. At that moment, the high priest entered her room and, seeing her reaction, asked if she really had some kind of problem. He noticed that she looked rather strange. Ariel immediately put on a straight face and replied that nothing like that had happened. She was just a little busy, that's all. But she didn't immediately understand who she was talking to, so she behaved rather casually. But as soon as she looked at her interlocutor, she was very surprised. Seeing Rayhouse, she was very scared. She immediately bowed to his high priesthood and asked for forgiveness for such treatment of him. The girl replied that she simply thought that it was Anna, and asked for forgiveness for behaving in such a way. She also said that this would never happen again. However, then the girl thought about why he came to her so suddenly. After all, they were not supposed to have a visit that day. She assumed that Dwayne had told her about the dagger from the auction, and that was the reason the man had come to have a serious talk with her. She knew that selling things to secretly save money was like running away in the middle of the night without warning. Because of this, Ariel became a little wary. She waited for what the man would say, but all this time he just stood silently and looked at her. Well, finally, Rayhouse spoke up and said that everything was fine. She could calmly communicate with him in a less formal tone. He treated it absolutely adequately. Ariel was very shocked when she heard this. She couldn't believe that he actually told her himself that she should communicate with him informally. She immediately turned to the man and said that of course she could not allow herself to behave like that, even if he asked for it. She said that it was not allowed to speak on equal terms with a man of his status. But Rayhouse said that she could call him by his name. He himself wanted it. Ariel didn't understand why he asked for such a thing. She knew that he was apparently of sound mind. So for her, such an attitude was very strange. Then Ariel began to carefully examine the high priest and noticed that his cheeks suddenly turned quite red, because she knew that they were not that color when he first came in. Ultimately, she felt that the best thing to do in this situation was to simply agree. She called him Mr. Rayhouse and said that she could call him that. The man was happy that the process had moved forward. However, he said that she could have not added the word Mr. and just called him by his first name. Ariel knew that it was impossible to call someone by just their name, except for their friends. So she replied that she would just need to think about it all, and then she would come to some kind of result. Rayhouse, hearing this, immediately became embarrassed. He understood that he had gone a little too far. Therefore, asking her for forgiveness, he explained that this was not what he wanted to say at all. It just slipped out. Ariel saw that his behavior was quite strange and suspicious, so she asked if something was bothering him. The man waved his hand sharply to the side and said that it was not like that at all. He just came to say hello to her and felt something strange in his heart. He said, "Today when I see the one I usually can't stand, I missed you so much." He moved closer to Ariel and looked straight into her eyes. The girl certainly didn't expect this. She immediately tried to push him away from herself, but she didn't succeed because the man started moving towards the table with her, and she simply rested her back against his. Rayhouse had a very hard time fighting with himself, so for a while he just stood and looked at the girl. Soon he realized that he was doing something wrong. The men finally moved away from her and asked for forgiveness. He also said that he would come. A little later, he turned around and began to leave. He crossed the room so quickly that Ariel didn't even have time to answer him. She just stood in the empty room in complete silence and tried to understand the situation that had happened. At some point, she even suggested that he was sick and that this was the reason he was behaving in this way. However, she received a notification from Odysseus, the god of love. He was delighted with the strength of the spirit of the Rayhouse before the blessing. The girl did not understand at all what this could mean, but then suddenly she began to receive many notifications from the gods. but she still did not understand what they were talking about because she did not consider him in a romantic way. Ariel didn't have time to figure out what to do when someone knocked on the door of the room again. She was wondering who had decided to come to her again this time. The girl turned around and saw that it was Anna. She smiled happily and turned to the saint and said that she had brought the tea that the girl had asked her for earlier. She also took some sweets with her. Ariel, who was already scared after Ray House appeared, thanked it but was still a little tense. Then suddenly Anna, after a short silence, said that it might sound stupid. However, she noticed that the girl was much more beautiful that day than usual. She would even like to say that there would be a very strange person who would not be able to love her. She also asked the saint how it was possible to evoke such a special feeling in people of such personalities Anna had never met before. The girl, hearing all this, was so shocked that she could not even control her facial expression, and as soon as the maid saw him, she immediately asked her for forgiveness. She assumed that she had said something stupid. But at that moment, the saint immediately realized that what had happened was all a matter of the blessing of the god of love. She also realized that Ray House was behaving very strangely, and for this reason she did not answer the maid's question, but only thanked you for bringing tea and said that she would eat everything later. She also added that she would like to read alone for a while, and asked if she could leave her for a while. The maid, of course, bowed and said that she would do so. She also said that if she needed anything, she could call her at any time. Anna would always be at her service. After the girl walked out the door, Ariel breathed a sigh of relief and thought that now everything was obvious. All their strange behavior was caused by the blessing. She couldn't believe that it was so serious that it affected people so strongly. At that very moment, Ray House returned to his office. He kept thinking about why he had acted this way. He was incredibly ashamed of his behavior. The man also did not understand why he was thinking about various completely unpleasant things next to this girl. He assumed that perhaps this was a special test from the gods or the price for the atonement of crimes. He did not know for sure. However, both options did not comfort him much. Ray House turned to the god of art and asked him to hear the prayer of his faithful servant. The man said that his life would always be ruled by the path of cleansing sins, and he asked him to heal this sinful body with a blessing. And if this does not happen, then in this case Ray House simply will not be able to endure it any longer, and it will all end in absolutely terrible things. Some time passed since then. Ariel went for a walk with her maid, who kept telling her about her internship. Anna proudly said that she became the most popular among the servants. They asked a lot of questions because the girl served the saint. The maid asked about Ariel's taste preferences, although she was familiar with the rules of the temple, so the girl did not tell her anything and followed all the rules that she had studied in advance. Here Anna suddenly noticed that Ariel was not listening to her at all. She turned to the lady and said that if various rumors eventually spread throughout the temple, it would definitely not be because of her. But Ariel calmed her down and smilingly told the maid that she believed her, so the girl could not worry about this at all. She also said that she would not change her mind, so Anna could breathe a sigh of relief and calmly do her job without thinking about it. At that moment, the maid even had tears of happiness in her eyes. She could not believe that the mistress really thought so, so she bowed and thanked her. But Ariel noticed that the people in the temple continued to spread rumors about her, since the girl had behaved in such a way, and began to fear accusations. But the girl tried to calm herself down. She said that this was completely normal. It always happens. There was no escape from it. After receiving divine power, all Ariel did was go to the library to find a way to quickly replenish her budget. The saint is the religious leader of the nation. The palace and the temple are the two pillars on which the empire itself stood. And at the top of this temple, of course, was now Ariel. However, she refused to participate in almost all official events, citing problems with her health. The girl believed that she would not have the popularity and influence of the previous saints, but she did not worry about it. On the contrary, she needed to lie low. The girl still considered it strange that the temple never reacted to it like that, but she believed that even if some problems had arisen in general, the Ray House would have certainly quickly resolved them. As soon as Ariel thought about Ray House, she immediately remembered the tense situation in which they had recently found themselves, and she felt very awkward. Her whole face turned red. She didn't understand what was wrong with her and why, when she remembered this, her heart started beating so fast. But at that moment, Anna turned to her because she noticed that something was wrong with the lady. The girl immediately cleared her throat and said that she wanted to tell her something. Ariel looked at the maid and asked, "What's the point of proving something to everyone you meet?" She didn't care at all about what others said, so she could definitely not worry about all this and live a peaceful life. As soon as the maid heard this, she could no longer contain her emotions. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she asked the saint for forgiveness for telling her such nonsense. Ariel smiled and replied that everything was absolutely fine. She was still worried about her, so she didn't get angry at her. Then they were about to go further, but the saint suddenly heard some strange sound not far from her in the bushes. The girl immediately opened them and saw a bird's wing there that was splashed with blood, which even scared her a little. The girl jumped up in surprise, and Anna, who came up behind her to see what was going on, was ready to burst into tears again. And all this because she saw a blue-winged bird that was dying. It was incredibly painful for the girl to see the wounded, beautiful bird. Anna wanted to help her somehow. However, she believed that it was already too late and there was nothing she could do. At that moment, the bird tried to fly away. However, it failed and fell to the ground again. All its feathers were covered in blood. Ariel, seeing this, realized that the bird was still trying to survive. She realized the fact that if she made a mistake, she herself would definitely die. The feeling of death before the soul leaves the body is something that it can never forget and throw out of its memory. This is the struggle with death. So she went up to the bird and picked it up. Anna was immediately surprised that she decided to do this because the bird was covered in blood and could easily splatter the lady. But Ariel didn't care. She pulled the bird closer to herself and said that there was nothing wrong with it. The girl herself thought that if only she could continue to live, everything would be wonderful. At that moment, everything around the girl suddenly began to shine. Anna was very surprised when she saw this, and a notification appeared in front of the girl that the body of the chosen one by the gods was covered with divine power. And after some time, Ariel felt how energy filled her body. And after that, she looked at the bird that she held in her hands and saw that its wing was now in perfect condition. The animal decided to take advantage of this wonderful moment and flew away from the girl's hands. It was very happy that it was able to survive, so it hurried to return home. Ariel was very shocked. She did not understand at all how this could happen. But then suddenly a new notification interrupted her thoughts. In it, the girl was asked if she would like to receive a reward for the first use of divine power. Ariel, as soon as she read this, immediately realized the fact that she somehow actually used this power and was able to save the bird. Anna, who saw it herself, screamed in surprise, turned to the saint and asked if it was really the power of the gods. She couldn't believe that she actually had such a wonderful chance to see it live. Ariel tried to tell her that there was nothing special about it, because it was just a bird. But the girl didn't agree with her. The maid said that many priests heal people, but even with prayers in the Bible, it is not so easy to heal someone. And Anna said that the lady hadn't even prayed yet. She simply asked for help, and the girl performed a real miracle. The maid, unable to contain her delight, said that the bird almost died and then simply took off and flew away as if nothing had happened. Ariel understood that she was too excited. She put her hand on her shoulder and in a stern voice asked the maid not to say a word about this to anyone. Anna, hearing about this, was very shocked. She asked if the girl really wanted her to keep all this a secret from everyone. The saint replied that everything was exactly like that. She did not explain why she wanted it that way, but she really did have a reason. Previously, Ariel could take a little risk, and the reason for this was that she already knew the future very well. In this alien world, her fate will only be in her hands if this future changes due to divine power, but Ariel just wanted a quiet life, so she was not ready to change everything so much. So, smiling, she asked her maid if she could promise her that she would keep everything she saw a secret. For the saint, it was really important that the servant who completely trusted the girl immediately said that of course she could even swear to her. The girl knelt down in front of her and replied that this was the mistress's order, so she certainly had no right to violate it so that not a single soul would know about it. Ariel was pleased. She smiled and decided to change the subject of the conversation and asked if she had heard about the new variety of roses that had appeared recently. The maid was a little surprised at how the mistress changed the subject of the conversation so quickly, but she decided to support her and also pretend as if nothing had happened. They decided to take a little walk and look for this new kind of roses in the garden. And at the same time, not far from them, the high priest was also walking. He was sitting in a gazebo that was located deep in the forest. He was not alone. The heir of the guild. Lloyd sat opposite him. The man did not understand. Why did the high priest do such a terrible thing to the Bluewing? She was not prey, but Ray House explained that she needed to be trained better so that she would stop biting her owner, so these were forced measures. Lloyd was very surprised by this and anxiously asked the man if he really wanted to say that these were such new training methods. The high priest replied that of course this would not work with dogs. However, he had done this with others many times, so it was no problem for him. As soon as the heir heard about this, he was very surprised and asked if this was really the work of the high priest. But he did not answer this clearly and said that he really hoped that it was. However, she didn't bite the owner anymore, so he was quite satisfied with the result. So Ray House decided not to dwell on this topic of conversation and changed the subject. The man took the white flower in his hand and said that he was very grateful to the gentleman for saving his white brass. He also said that he heard that this climate was not suitable for her, and he also told Lloyd that he would never forget what the man had done, so he remained in his debt. The heir replied that for their guild, this was a mere trifle. Now the Eliom festival would be a success, and this was the most important thing for him. But Ray House thanked him again and said that they would bring them to the greenhouse and entrust them to the gardener when the festival was over. So these flowers were definitely completely safe. Of course, Lloyd was very surprised when he saw such an appeal from the high priest, because usually he was as callous as a cracker, but then he suddenly became interested in such flowers. At that moment, to their great surprise, this same blue-winged bird flew to the crown prince, landed on his shoulder, and looked like new. As soon as the high priest saw her, he was surprised. He said that he thought that the dog had beaten her up badly. However, now she even looked normal. Lloyd looked closely at the bird that was sitting on his shoulder and knew that it was definitely her, because she had a unique red spot on her forehead. But in that case, he did not understand how this could be. The man suggested that most likely this bird was cured by some high-ranking priest. It all looked like help from the god of mercy, because otherwise the bird would definitely not have been able to survive with such injuries. The high priest was about to answer something. However, suddenly he saw a saint behind the crown prince who also saw him. Their eyes suddenly met, and they both said nothing, but Ariel greeted him first. She certainly didn't expect to see a man in the middle of the garden at such an early hour of the day. She didn't know what he was doing there and simply decided to leave that place as quickly as possible so that no more very awkward situations would happen again. Therefore, Ariel replied that she had not heard about his guest asking for forgiveness and said that she would leave immediately so as not to distract them. She took her maid friend and began to leave, saying that it was time for them to go. But Ray House turned to her and asked if they had really gone out for a walk. Ariel then realized that her escape had failed because she would have to stay and talk to him and therefore leave calmly. She definitely wouldn't be able to anymore. The girl turned to the high priest again and greeted him properly. The man also bowed to her in response and said that he wished the same. The man then suddenly pointed towards his guest and said that he would like to introduce him to her. It was the owner of a small trading guild, the Casloid man, who also said that she could call him Marquis Lloyd. As soon as Ariel heard this, she was very scared, but looking to the side, she actually saw a tall, dark-haired man who also decided to say hello to her. Bowing, the man replied that it was an honor for him to meet the holy Elioma of the Temple of the Nine Gods. The girl thought that it was all very strange because according to the plot, he should never have seen Ariel, so something was already going wrong. But the girl greeted Marquis Lloyd and said that she was glad to meet him and welcomed him to the Eliom. At this moment, Ray House suddenly stood up from his seat and asked if they had really come for a walk in the garden. He also added that she could have easily asked him to accompany her earlier and even give her a short tour. At that moment, Ray House began to smile very sweetly, and this made Ariel incredibly wary. She didn't like his smile at all, so she quickly looked away from him and said that of course she couldn't distract such a busy man. So she decided to just take a walk with her maid. Ariel also explained that she and Anna were passing by and asked him to continue enjoying the conversation with his guest and not get distracted. But at that moment, one of the temple workers suddenly approached them. He turned to the high priest and said that something serious had happened. After that, he immediately explained the situation to him in his ear. Ray House replied that they had some problems with the construction, so he needed to leave and go and personally control this situation. He asked for forgiveness and said that it really couldn't wait. Ariel was very happy and thought that everything had worked out incredibly well. She already wanted to say that in that case she would go. However, she didn't even have time to utter a word because Lloyd spoke first and said that the high priest could certainly go, but in the meantime, he would talk to the saint. At that moment, the girl became very upset because she understood that she definitely wouldn't be able to get out of this situation without ruining everything even more. When Ray House left, she slowly turned and looked at the Marquis. She didn't understand why he had such a frightening face, and Yura from him was certainly not friendly, and she felt uneasy about it. She ended up speaking to him first and said that she thought it was time for her to leave because she still had some unfinished business. But at that very moment, a blue-winged bird suddenly flew up to her, and Ariel, seeing it, was immediately happy. It was a great relief for her to see that everything was really all right with her. Lloyd, hearing these words, immediately asked if the girl had already seen this bird. Ariel, smiling, answered that everything was exactly like that. She began to stroke the animal and replied that she had come across it completely by accident. She said hello to this beautiful bird again and said that she was very glad that everything was okay with it now. But at that moment, the man said in a very rude voice that this bird was trained to fly only to its owner. However, as if by some miracle, it was able to become attached to the girl. He replied that all of this was really incredibly strange, and he would like to hear at least some explanation. But Ariel, hearing that it was his bird, was very surprised. And Lloyd also confirmed this information and said that he generally thought that she was already dead. Then the girl realized that this man was one of those types of people who measured and evaluated everything in money. He was a man who ignored the pain and feelings of others. Even pointing a sword at Camilla was no problem at all for him. Lloyd was a man with a piece of ice instead of a heart. Such people rarely felt guilt and paid no attention to anyone but themselves. The man asked the saint if it was she who saved this unfortunate bird. Ariel replied that it was not like that at all. It was not her. But clenching her hand into a fist, she asked the man how he, knowing that she was in such trouble, could simply abandon her. The man replied in a cold voice that it was just a bird, and nothing terrible would have happened if it had died. Ariel was genuinely amazed by what she heard. Sighing heavily, she said that she was very surprised at how simple the life of another was for him. She asked him if he had ever encountered death, or if he had tried with all his might to avoid it just to live for at least one more minute. The girl, continuing to stroke the bird, replied that if he thinks that life is not worth anything, then it would be better for him to simply kill this bird. They are making it suffer so much. Don't let it live without any hope. At that moment, Lloyd called his animal to him, and she landed on his shoulder. And the man said that the girl was very different from the rumors that were circulating around her. Ariel replied that it made absolutely no difference to her. She was just glad that the bird was okay now, and hoped that in the future he would take care of her. So the girl said that if he really was the owner of this animal, he should value it and protect it with all his might. After all, we are always responsible for those we have tamed. After that, she turned around and started to leave, saying that it was really time for her to go. Ariel wished him a good day, and when the girl had already moved a few steps away from him, she suddenly heard the voice of the Lloyd, who said that he really hoped that they would meet again. After this, Ariel returned to her estate, and for some time she simply sat on the bed and thought about this whole conversation. She certainly didn't want to see this man again. He seemed very unpleasant to her, and she didn't want to have any contact with him in the future. The girl thought that she had enough in her head and those two men who had dealt with her, so she did not understand why she needed even more unnecessary problems. Ariel knew that she had only one way. She needed to get out of this temple as soon as possible and lie low. So she decided to accept that reward for the first use of divine power. As soon as she activated it, she immediately received several notifications, one of which said that the level of the prophecy had been increased as a reward for completing the mission, and the second level prophecy had already been opened. Ariel read the instructions and noticed that now she had another side at her disposal. This god turned out to be Seal. He was the god of destruction. The man was very happy that he joined the others and gave the girl his blessing at that moment. Ariel felt all the power that he entrusted to her. And then suddenly it came to her that at Kyle's birthday party, the one they used as an excuse for the explosion was indeed the god of destruction, Ciel. She couldn't believe that all this was true, but then suddenly several more revealed secrets appeared before her. Ariel knew she had to test this power to know for sure. She looked around the room and tried to figure out what she could use so that no one would suspect. Then she saw a chair that stood next to her workplace. The girl believed that this could be a very good object for using her power. The girl touched the chair and thought that this would happen now. However, nothing happened. Ariel looked at her hand, which hadn't changed at all. She thought that she would have a special power, but the girl assumed that she was wrong in the end. However, at that moment, she suddenly heard a loud crack from this very chair. It just took and broke in half and also fell to the ground. When the saint saw this, she was very shocked and thought about the fact that this story should have been a romantic fantasy with a reverse harem and not have such a cruel force in it. At some point, it even seemed to her that the genre had simply changed, but Ariel decided not to dwell on it. That day, she was very tired, so she no longer communicated with the gods or studied anything about her power. The next morning, with a clear head and full of energy, the girl read several books. The blessing of Chesed helped her a lot. She had enough for 10 large books a day, so she learned a lot of important and new information for herself. Now Ariel has given up the basic information about this world, so she has realized the fact that she won't be lost if she runs away. And with the help of the divine power of hell, she can easily earn money for herself. She can use it at any time to treat people for a certain fee, or she could just become a healer. But then she wouldn't use the power of just the herb and the usual healing methods. One way or another, in any case, the girl needed a job and she decided to settle on the profession of a doctor after she ran away from the temple. But compared to all this, the blessings still had certain nuances. They could last no more than 3 hours, and each one could only be used once a day. Ariel now had 4 of them. Hezets could improve learning abilities. Monty gave her enhanced observation skills, and Odysseus made the girl more beautiful. Also, now she had a new god Ciel. His power was really very great. She had already broken 3 handles in a week. And also, the chair was completely beyond repair. Ariel, of course, didn't use this power on people, so she didn't know what could happen if she used it against some hooligans and villains. Everything that Da simply touched, even ordinary things, were simply destroyed. Accordingly, she knew that she would be able to protect herself if something happened, and this fact certainly made her happy. When she turned to God and said that he really had an excellent blessing for which she was certainly very grateful to him. Because Ariel praised one God so much, others began to be offended. She did not understand why they behaved this way. After all, they were not children, but she could not solve this problem. Ariel realized that she would have to praise them all for their merits, otherwise others would be offended and do nasty things to her, so she praised everyone in turn and suggested not to quarrel anymore. After that, suddenly, by chance, a girl knocked on her door and allowed her to enter. And the maid asked for forgiveness for disturbing her. The maid looked at the saint and said that a guest had come to see her. The girl, hearing about this, was very surprised and asked who it could be, and she replied that it was His Highness and he was already waiting for her. The saint certainly did not expect that Kyle would decide to meet with her. Laughing nervously, she asked him to say that she was sick and therefore, unfortunately, would not be able to come out to him. But at that moment, the man just walked up to the entrance to the room and said in a rough voice that it was more like a pretense. He pushed himself against the front door and, smiling, asked what they were going to do now. After all, he had no desire to leave. Ariel bowed and greeted the prince according to all the rules, but the man waved his hand and said that they needed to go and finish what they had not discussed last time. In the end, she simply had no choice, so the girl went out to get a pickaxe. They went into the garden to talk calmly. Initially, the crown prince was not supposed to spend so much time with the saint, so the girl was very wary because the plot had completely changed. She was also very interested in what he was going to talk about in such a quiet and remote place. She was even a little afraid of him. In order for the gods not to disturb her with their comments, she disconnected from them, because she understood that they would only irritate her even more. Well, then suddenly he finally turned to her and said that last time he admired her acting talent. However, today's pretense looked really very pathetic. The girl, hearing this, immediately stopped in her tracks. She did not expect that he would want to start the conversation right away with this. But when the man saw that she was not at all interested in the conversation, he decided to get straight to the point so as not to waste any time. Kyle replied that in fact he came to her so late in the evening and disturbed the girl only to warn her. At that very moment, Ray House was in his sanctuary and a knight who was watching the saint came to him on the road. He said that at the celebration of the prince's birthday, the saint supported His Highness and he was blessed with seal by the god of destruction. As soon as Ray House heard that Ariel supported Prince Kyle, he was very surprised because he believed that she should have known that this was not the person who needed to be protected. Finally, he sighed heavily and turned to God and said that if this was not a test for him, then she was truly special. In fact, the man assumed that it was all about love. Of course, he guessed. However, he couldn't know for sure. But then suddenly the knight said that in fact, he had come to report that the crown prince had come to visit the saint. He said that they were now in a place where eventually Ray House sighed heavily and turned to Dwayne because he was not going to tolerate all this. He asked where the saint was now because he was actually going to interrupt their conversation. Ariel, meanwhile, continued her conversation with the crown prince. He said that he received this information immediately after the banquet. Empress Albert's brother Michael collaborated with the temple ministers, and he assumed that they were digging under her, and he could not intervene for political reasons, but decided to tell her about it. When the girl heard this, she was very surprised, although she should have expected it, because it was inevitable. The appearance of the saint calmed the worried hearts of the people. Kyle took advantage of this 2 years ago and strengthened his position. It was a conspiracy between the Prince's Ray House and the false saint. She also supported him at the last banquet. So now the Empress will certainly be sniffing out information about her. However, she absolutely did not remember reading about this. Ariel and Kyle did not meet for such a reason, certainly not in the original story. But this could only mean one thing, namely that history had changed. So this was very dangerous for Ariel. She turned to the prince and asked if there were any details about all this. But Kyle replied that unfortunately there were none. Alberta was busy looking for a person to spy on. Hearing about this, she was very surprised and asked if the man hadn't said that someone had already been following her. Kyle replied that his informant had disappeared somewhere. Albert had recently become even more aggressive than usual. The saint replied that this was good. This meant that no one would be watching her for some time, and this meant that she could prepare. But Kyle replied that the spy had disappeared. It couldn't be left like that. Now everyone was waiting for the attack, which meant that it could happen at any time. He replied that they could already easily find out something very important, and asked if she had any ideas on how she could protect herself. but Ariel shook her head and said that she had none. Of course, in the end, the prince sighed heavily and replied that they had no choice. If she noticed anything suspicious, she had to immediately tell him. The girl did not object, because she understood that her life depended on it, but then she also said that she wanted to ask him for something. When the man heard about this, you were very surprised and asked what it could be. But Ariel said that the crown prince of the empire who mastered the art of the sword since childhood and also the laws of the heir to the throne, he must become the one who will subjugate the great power of the empire and lead the entire continent. She asked if he thought the same. Kyle didn't answer because he didn't look that far into the future and couldn't know everything for sure, unlike the girl. After a short silence, Ariel said that she had already helped him once, and since they were now partners, she would like to ask him for something. At that moment, Kyle immediately became wary. He asked if this was really another marriage proposal. The girl, hearing this assumption, was very scared and immediately said that this was definitely not the case. She also asked him not to joke, so she replied that she had only one request, and it was for him to protect her. The man, wary, asked what exactly she meant by the word protect. Ariel replied that she wanted to survive since he had become her ally, so she would need his help. The girl knew that even if they were in the same boat, there was no guarantee that everything would not end as it was originally supposed to. The fake saint is only needed to stabilize the mood in the country. If someone finds out the truth, there will be no reason to leave the girl alive at all. She said that she was working hard to support the empire of His Highness and the High Priest, and because of her efforts, she wanted a peaceful life while they were on the same side. Kyle suddenly heard this and was very surprised, asking in an alarmed voice if she really thought that he could kill her. The girl did not answer his question. She simply asked him to make her a promise. He still agreed to this and said that there would be no blood on his mosque if she did not become an enemy. He swore on the name of Kyle Alexei of the Elite. Smiling, she thanked him for this. The man immediately noticed how much she calmed down when she heard his promise, and this really scared him because he did not think that she could consider him her enemy. Ariel didn't respond to this, but Kyle began to come closer and said that the letter with the proposal looked as if she was even ready to commit suicide if he refused. He found himself very close to her and, turning to the saint, asked what she was thinking when she wrote that ill-fated letter. She said that she loves him, wants to be on his side, and is looking forward to it. He straightens her hair and asks if everything she wrote was really untrue. She panicked very much and said in a trembling voice that all this was not so. But the man interrupted her incoherent speech. Kyle said it was time to pick up where they left off last time. The girl replied that she had already told him that time that she was drunk, so he shouldn't have taken all this seriously. She had absolutely no understanding of what she was writing about or what she was doing. But then suddenly, Ariel heard an incredibly familiar voice not far from her. Of course, it belonged to the High Priest. The man was looking for His Highness. As soon as Ray House approached them, he said that he thought that the man had come to meet him. However, he saw him with the saint. The man smiled and said that he was wondering what they were doing in such a secluded place in the middle of the night, and why no one had warned him at all that the crown prince had arrived. Ariel immediately bowed and greeted the high priest properly, while Kyle didn't even blink an eye. He looked at the man with caution and said that they simply had something to discuss. After all, they had not managed to discuss everything at the party, so he decided to meet with her. The girl immediately screamed and said that everything was correct. His Highness wanted to talk to her about the food at the banquet. Of course, she did not want to reveal all her secrets to the high priest, and therefore came up with this theory. Ariel explained that there were many complaints about this. Even non-fresh products were encountered. They had already agreed, so she was already going to return back to her room. But the high priest smiled and told the crown prince that the saint belonged to the temple. So it was best to avoid such unexpected personal meetings with her. He also looked at the girl and said that first of all, this concerns Saint Ariel, who asked for forgiveness and replied that she would certainly be more careful in the future. The girl herself felt incredibly uneasy. She didn't understand why he decided to provoke Kyle in this way. The man then grimaced and asked, "Since when could anyone control the affairs of the saint?" He said that the high priest had already crossed all sorts of boundaries and gone too far. The man replied that he was always ready to deal with dangerous matters, and His Highness knew this very well from the very beginning. Ray House smiled and said that because of the incident at the banquet, some nobles paid undue attention to the Empress and the saint and the temple. The prince then smiled and very quickly took out the sword and pointed it at the high priest. It was only a few centimeters from his throat. The man, smiling without permission, replied that if we were talking about dangerous matters, then such a turn of events should have been foreseen. Kyle replied that his principles do not allow him to let the actions of arrogant people go unpunished. He asked the high priest questions regarding the holy temple. That's all you wanted to know. Kyle also said that first of all, officially this meeting or personal, No one was allowed to show their arrogance, and because of this, he was very unhappy with the behavior of Ray House. But the high priest wasn't even worried about the fact that a sword was pointed at him. He just smiled calmly and said that he understood what the man wanted to say. Ariel, meanwhile, sighed heavily and thought that she certainly couldn't be lucky and that she wouldn't be able to find normal, adequate people in the temple. The girl decided to take advantage of the help of the Moda and just leave this place while she was thinking about all this. The high priest suddenly turned to her. He told the girl that if she was tired, she could say goodbye to you and go back and rest peacefully. Since they had already finished their discussion, she could return. And the man was going to stay with the crown prince and talk for a bit. In the end, she decided to take advantage of this wonderful opportunity and left that tense place. Anna immediately ran to her and decided to ask her about all the details. She said that she had a conversation with the crown prince and suggested that it was amazing because it was such an honor for anyone to meet him and talk. But the girl was not as inspired as Anna thought. On the contrary, she was very upset and excited. When the listener saw her in this position, she immediately asked what was wrong with her. But Ariel, sighing heavily, replied that she was so tired during this conversation because of their arguments and asked what kind of relationship they had. Anna asked what happened. She thought that the girl would be happy, but it was not so. Ariel was very surprised to hear that the maid thought she should be happy and immediately asked why she should be happy at all. But the girl explained that she loved the crown prince so much, so it was very surprising to her that now, after meeting him, she was so upset. Ariel, hearing this, immediately ran up to Anna and screamed loudly asking where she heard this. But the girl explained that the whole temple already knew about it, so it was no longer a secret. Anna said that everyone only talks about the fact that the saint was waiting to meet him. She even sang about it during walks. Wherever she goes, she always talks about the prince. Ariel certainly didn't expect to hear this. She didn't understand what was wrong with her character at all. However, now it became obvious to her why Ray House reacted when he saw them together. She also remembered that her character wrote letters to him, and the story spread and eventually reached the point of absurdity, which she, of course, did not like at all. She assumed that Ray House must have heard something exaggerated, and that was the reason why he looked at her with such glances and decided to intervene in their conversation. The girl sighed heavily and said that she needed to start changing her strategy. Anna was surprised to hear this and asked what exactly she was talking about. But Ariel asked if she remembered her story about the servant. She ordered not to say anything about her. But Ariel also added that it would be better now if she spread a few rumors about all this. Anna certainly did not resist, but she still did not understand why it was necessary to do this, and even so, abruptly. But the girl asked the maid to say that she, like Saint Eliam, wanted to live alone, and that she did not need any love or marriage. Hearing this, the maid immediately panicked and asked if this really meant that she would never have a fiancé and would remain completely alone for the rest of her days. But Ariel waved her hand and said that there was nothing wrong with that. Previous saints married aristocrats and left the temple, but she had much more important things to do, so she thanked Anna in advance for this service and told her to tell everyone the story of the holy single woman. The maid still did not understand why all this had to be done. However, she still agreed to it and said that everything would be done. Ariel meanwhile turned her aside and told her that in that case she should start doing it right now. The girl also added that she could only trust her, so she hoped for her professionalism. Anna still had special doubts. She turned to the girl and asked if everything would be okay. She smiled and replied that of course she didn't have to worry about anything. In the end, the maid replied that she understood everything and that she would do everything after that, wished good night to the mistress and left the room. The girl slowly got ready for bed, and as soon as she lay down in bed, she thought that clinging to Ray House and chasing Kyle in the original story was not such a stupid idea. The girl also had one more important thing after leaving the temple. She wanted to live in luxury for the rest of her days. Ariel believed that in her second life she had no time for nonsense like love and feelings. She did not become like in the original story, and she certainly was not going to waste her precious minutes on some other people. While the girl was sleeping peacefully, after some time she suddenly began to hear someone's voices in her sleep. They were trying to wake her up. Someone in a thin voice told Ariel to wake up immediately because there had been an explosion, and she somehow continued to sleep peacefully. Ariel waved them off and said that she needed to sleep for a few more minutes. Then the voices became even more indignant. They told her to wake up immediately. After all, if the northern one is hidden, then she will definitely be held responsible for it. But in the end, the girl continued to just sleep. In the end, she simply had no choice. So opening her eyes, she noticed that there was still a very large shadow in the yard. She turned to Anna and asked her to take out the children who were waking her up here. Then the girl realized that these were really children. She opened her eyes and saw children flying in front of her, They were talking about how the gods were furious, those crazy people were throwing lightning bolts left and right. Seeing these creatures, Ariel screamed loudly. She did not understand what was happening, who they were, and why they appeared right in front of her bed. The children continued to shout for her to intervene in all this, because that way, the north would simply explode. Ariel tried her best to understand what they were saying, but she couldn't, so she just watched in silence. When one of the boys suddenly took out several sheets of paper and said that she should first sign and then they would finally solve the problem, Ariel didn't understand why she had to sign. However, the children yelled at her and said that there was little time, so she had to hurry. They simply asked her to sign and not ask unnecessary questions. The girl noticed that this sheet was absolutely blank. She did not understand why they needed it, but she picked up a pen and still signed it because they asked for it. One of the boys suddenly laughed and said that it was the first time he had seen such an insincere signature. It was so ugly that they didn't even want to leave it. After that, one of them asked the other which frame they would choose. Wood or metal? Another boy replied that he would take a metal one and that one a wooden one so that they could be distinguished at all. Ariel, meanwhile, just sat and watched them. She didn't understand what they were talking about and why they wanted to frame her signature, because she wasn't some kind of idol or celebrity. So when they finally quieted down, she turned to these children and asked who they were anyway. And she asked what kind of place it was in which she woke up. She didn't understand why she was there and why everything was so strange. The children asked her for forgiveness and said that they would certainly explain everything basic now, so that she would not be scared. One of the boys said that even taking into account the receipt of divine power, the time in spiritual form is very limited. They were beings that were divided from the primordial god in her world, such a system was called, and they were her managers. One of them was called Ren and the second Peng, and it was they who brought her wandering soul to this place. Ariel, as soon as she heard all these explanations, was still left with many questions. She tried to process this information for a while. She wondered if this meant that they really were in control of the system and had brought her to this place when she was simply sleeping. Ren replied that everything was absolutely correct. They usually didn't do that. However, at that moment, they simply had no choice. He explained that it was all because the gods were showing too much interest in her, so they simply had to intervene. The girl asked what exactly they meant when they said this. She also thought that it was their fault. Since they were the managers, she also had many questions that she wanted to ask, especially about the system of this entire world. Ariel continued to be angry. She asked why the prophecy appeared so suddenly without any warning. She felt like she was being used as a guinea pig, and it made her feel uncomfortable. She screamed loudly and said that they had no right to be angry with her. She had many difficulties, so she wanted to hear clear and organic explanations. Ren wondered if she really wanted to hear all this, even if the gods were ready to eat her soul alive. No Pen suddenly shut him up and said that his brother was one of those who only pay attention to appearances, so he asked her not to pay attention to him and everything he said. He sighed heavily and also said that unfortunately he could not say the reason for all this. They still had a very important problem that had not been solved, so it was impossible to think about anything else. And when Ariel already wanted to say something, she didn't have time to do it because a loud lightning flash sounded not far from them, and then thunder rang out. The girl did not expect this. She immediately screamed loudly and asked what it was, but Ren replied that this was exactly what they were talking about. He said that the gods were angry, they attacked the system with lightning. Ariel assumed that this was all again the work of Kaised. But she did not understand why this happened. She sighed heavily and said, "Why are they angry that he doesn't understand whether the girl even thought about what she was doing even once?" Ariel then remembered what happened before she fell asleep and said that all she did was talk to Ada and meet Kyle and Ray House, but then she remembered another very important one. And it consisted of the fact that before the meeting, she turned off the transmission for the gods and had no connection with them. Once she realized this, she wondered if all this really happened because she passed out. Pan bowed and replied that she certainly had the right to do so. However, the gods could no longer watch, and in such situations, they usually simply lose interest. And this time, for some reason, they got angry at them and waited for Ariel to continue. Having heard about all this, Ariel immediately asked if they really wanted her to continue. The system workers said that this is exactly how it is, and that before things get any worse, it would be best for her to return everything to how it was. The girl thought about it for a while, but then she wondered what would happen if she just gave it up. Ren, hearing even just a suggestion about this, immediately screamed loudly and asked if she really didn't want to continue. Ariel thoughtfully said that in fact, if they answered all her questions, then she could certainly think about it. Pan replied that he did not believe that this man with such a soul could receive divine power. For him, all this was very strange and suspicious. Well, Ren asked the girl how she could boldly point them out. because the system is a huge blessing and she should have listened to them and not given them an ultimatum. Smiling, Ariel said that whether it was a blessing or a curse, only she could decide. Then she looked at them with a crazy look and asked if they really had something against it. Of course, the boys had no other choice but to agree to her terms. So, with a heavy sigh, Pen asked what exactly she wanted to know. Some time has passed since then. Ariel finally learned everything she needed, returned to her world, and having completed her work, she was glad that everything was over. Now she thought that she could turn on the broadcast right after that. She started receiving many notifications from the gods. They were very angry that she did this. When Ariel saw that Hisek, the god of knowledge, had prepared lightning and wanted to tell her a lot, she was now convinced for sure that it was he who had created that mess in the system room. So before he could draw any conclusions, she turned to the Hiset and asked if he could give her permission to do this. But Ciel categorically shook his head. The girl said that there was nothing wrong with that. She didn't just switch off for no reason. She had her own reasons for this, so she hoped that they wouldn't be offended by her for too long. She said that she had every right to a private life without their participation, so they had no right to be angry with her just because she wanted some of her time. From the gods' reaction, Ariel assumed that they understood her, so she said that from now on she would turn off the prophecy whenever she needed to. The girl said that, for example, this would happen when she was in the bathroom, but in the end the gods did not agree with them. They replied that they did not look at her naked body at all, so she could not worry. The girl explained that this was not the case at all. The prophecy would be active almost all the time anyway, so they should not have merged from just short breaks that she would like to have. This especially concerned Kised. Of course. If he overdoes it with thunder and lightning, then she will completely take and refuse the prophecy. Such were her conditions. In the end, they agreed with the girl because they definitely didn't want to be disconnected. Ariel didn't care at all how much the almighty gods were in this relationship. She had to dominate so that everything had to be beneficial to both parties, in her opinion. But then she suddenly remembered that she also had something for them, and God immediately became curious about what she was talking about. Ariel believed that balance was important in any relationship, so she showed them the little bracelets. She said that she made them to show her respect for them. She asked how they liked these bracelets, and the girl explained that she wasn't very good at needlework, so they certainly weren't the most beautiful. She just wanted to thank them for everything they had done. For some time, there was not even a single notification from the gods. The girl began to worry that her handiwork might have been too simple for them, and even regretted that she had shown it at all. However, at that moment, the bracelets that she was holding in her hands suddenly lit up and soon simply disappeared. Immediately after this, she began to receive notifications that God really liked them. The girl breathed a sigh of relief. She was happy that her plan had worked after all. She was glad that they had at least calmed down a little, and also assumed that Ren and Pan were probably happy that everything had calmed down. In fact, when she was still there and asked them a question, they said that they couldn't answer it. Of course, the girl was very indignant. After all, they had promised. Ren explained that it was simply a very complex issue and this information was only for administrators, so they simply did not have the right. But the girl said that they took and turned her into Ariel. There must be a reason for this, and she believed that she had the right to know her. They sighed heavily and said that they were just observers and that they certainly weren't the ones who chose her, so they didn't bear any responsibility for it. Then Ariel asked them to tell her what would happen if she stayed in the Return of Saint Camilla. As soon as Ren heard that she called this work the Return of Saint Camilla, he immediately asked why she thought so. The girl didn't understand what they were surprised about. She said that she had read this book before arriving in this place. Everything started with the Ilium Empire Temple, and Leda Camilla is the main character. 3 male characters are connected to her. The fake Saint Ariel wants to take Camilla's place, and in the end, she just dies. Ren immediately asked if there were any demons mentioned in the book, but the girl said that this was not the case, it was mostly romance. How could she add that there was nothing about demons there? So she asked why they even asked about it. It was quite strange. Pen explained that if such a plot then the prophecy could come true. His brother agreed and said that the coincidence was certainly colossal. The girl, listening to their argument, did not understand at all what they were talking about. She asked what they meant and what kind of coincidence they were talking about. Ren sighed heavily and thought about how he could explain all this because it was really hard to understand. But he said that what she read was most likely a prophecy that led to the current events. And if there were no demons there, then it could only be a small part of it. Ariel now understood that the novel she had read was a real prophecy and not just a story. She couldn't just get into the story, but in her world there was a prophecy about this world that she read, and after death she somehow just moved into the body of the villain Ariel. The prophecy was definitely coming true, and if so, it meant that Ariel could die immediately. She asked the system workers if this would really happen to her. Ben replied that everything was quite possible. However, she was not the real Ariel, but simply a soul from another world that ended up in her body. He said that the girl simply needed to change the fate of her character. The book was endowed with the power of prophecy. Someone's hopes were invested in it. The girl, hearing about this, was very shocked and immediately asked whose hopes were put there. But Ren asked her for forgiveness and said that unfortunately he could not tell her more. Now what was important was that the prophecy was distorted and she replaced it. Pan suddenly shouted at his brother and said that if they tell more, it will affect the future, so they needed to shut up immediately or everything will be very bad. The brother agreed with him. So he sighed heavily and said that that was all they could say on the matter. Ariel asked them to stop and said that she wanted to ask something else. But the creatures began to slowly disappear and said that it was time to return. And when some time had passed since that moment, Ariel continued to go to various auctions. The knight who accompanied her said that she had many deals that day and asked if she was really going to sell all those things she had taken from the auction again. He also said that she was quite a lucky person because not everyone can be so lucky. But Ariel answered Mr. Dwayne that it was not all about luck. Everything was much more complicated, and only the gods knew the reasons for such coincidences. The man always got nervous when she started talking about gods, so he simply asked her forgiveness for asking such questions and decided not to touch on the topic again. In fact, even all her money from the temple would not be enough to escape. Ariel was very lucky that Monty helped her, so now she could easily earn even more and eventually get what she needed. She turned to Dwayne and asked if he thought, as she did, that this auction was a good one. The girl also said that some people say that these things are from the collection of Count Rosen's grandfather. The man agreed with her and said that she really was able to buy a lot of things, and this surprised him. His assortment now included a necklace, a garnet, a sculpture of God Monty, a portrait of a saint aged 50, a lead candlestick, and the necklace looked the best among this list. The girl agreed with him and thought that if her expectations were met, then this would be a real jackpot for her. In the end, they came to that very same shop. The girl went inside, asked for forgiveness, and asked if she could come in. But then suddenly she heard an argument between men. One of the sellers was arguing with a customer and asked how much longer he had to repeat all this. He said that it doesn't matter at all how much this thing cost on the crony. They don't change anything for anyone. So he suggested that this person just take the money and resist me. But the man who brought the item said that he knew perfectly well that their guild had it and asked if he really wanted the girl to complain, in which case he would be fired. The man replied that the chronicle was illegal, so they had never conducted such transactions, and this time certainly could not be an exception. The girl, who was holding the gold jewelry in her hands, suddenly started to argue. She said that if the man did not agree, then she would have to meet with the owner himself. Ariel looked at her hand and noticed that it was a platinum chain. It cost quite a lot of francs. The seller said that the owner was busy at the moment. If she wanted to meet with him, she would have to make arrangements in advance in any case. Dwayne, who also heard this conversation, sighed heavily and was very surprised that they asked to keep it secret, because he knew that it was all connected with opium. As soon as Ariel heard about opium, she was a little surprised and immediately asked what it was. And the man explained everything to her in detail. He said that sometimes it was used as a painkiller, but most often it was sold as a drug, and that this plant could only be grown in the temple. It knocks down the pulse, and with an overdose, it is easy to even die. The girl, meanwhile, continued to argue with the seller, hitting her hand on the table. She asked if he even knew who she was. In the end, when she didn't get anything she wanted, the girl turned around and started to leave, and also said that they would regret not having done this. She noticed the face she saw on the passing girl and learned that it was the Empress's servant, but she didn't understand why the girls needed the cronium at all. Before leaving, the maid turned around and said that God would not leave this guild alone, after which she slammed the door behind her. For a while there was complete silence, but then everyone around heard the steps of feet descending the stairs. The man turned to Ron and said that he was a great guy. He hated getting involved in a showdown, so the guy did a great job. He was even ready to give him a small bonus. As soon as the man went down, he saw that Ron was not alone there. He immediately stopped and, seeing Ariel, said that he met her again. The man also added that he did not know that there was another guest here, and he smiled and said that he was interested in what could have brought the noble saint to this place. Ariel couldn't believe that she had run into this man again. She felt very sad about it. She bowed and greeted him and said that she had come to this place to sell something, so he didn't have to worry. Lloyd continued to smile and asked if the saint was telling the truth. Ron, who saw the things she brought, immediately said that she definitely wasn't lying. He also said that he remembered that she had been involved in sales before, so she could be trusted. Ariel, her voice shaking slightly from fear of the man, said that, in fact, it was true. She decided to sell them because she no longer needed them. She also said that someone might definitely find such things useful, so she decided to come to this place in order to get the right exchange. Lloyd then looked to the side and saw the necklace that she brought. He said that he understood everything, and he himself became very interested in this little thing. He took this medallion in his hands and, looking at it carefully, asked, "Could it really be that this necklace once belonged to a saint?" The girl was a little worried, however. She agreed with the man and said that everything was correct. Of course, she couldn't say that she started buying things at auction and selling them at a premium. Ariel believed that she needed to get rid of him as quickly as possible in order not to give herself away in the end. But the man suddenly smiled and said that he agreed to buy it. He said that he was ready to give 10,000 francs for this thing and asked if such a sum would suit the saint. As soon as the girl and her assistant heard about this, they were very surprised. She certainly did not expect this, so she was silent for a while and at some point even asked again if he was saying exactly this amount. The man replied that everything was correct. He said that this was exactly how much the necklace cost that she offered him to deceive. He certainly did not want to. The girl, meanwhile, very much doubted that he was not deceiving her, because in her opinion it was a simple necklace, so she could not believe that it would cost so much. Then Ron turned to the Marquis and said that this was my necklace. The red price was maximum 600 francs. He asked if the man had raised the price too much for him. Rails thought about the fact that it was really true that a family of commoners could live for 10 years on such an amount, and it was also the equivalent of her annual salary. So she was very surprised that Lloyd offered exactly such an amount. She did not understand why he was willing to pay this money instead of a much smaller amount. Then suddenly the knight turned to her and told the saint that this was an excellent offer. So before he changed his mind, she needed to agree quickly. Ariel thought about it for a while, but eventually she suddenly said that she had changed her mind and didn't want to sell the necklace anymore. She then told Ron to evaluate all the other things except this necklace. The man saw several things and asked, did she really want him to evaluate only these 3 things? Ariel said that everything was exactly like that. The knight who accompanied her began to doubt very much. He asked the lady if she was sure of her decision. After all, it was a very advantageous offer, but for some reason she decided to refuse. For some time the girl thought about it again, but in the end she said that everything was right and she did not plan to sell the necklace anymore. Of course, it is possible that he bought into the benefits, but Ariel tried to think pragmatically. Of course, the price of such a huge amount is incredibly attractive, but she did not want to get involved with the cunning fox Cass Lloyd, because she understood that he was definitely up to something and offering her something like that. The man suddenly laughed, took her hand and said that he was incredibly sorry that she changed her mind. He also said that he really hoped to get closer to her. Thanks to this deal, he also intended to notice the fact that she had a real diamond eye. Lloyd said that she managed to get hold of a necklace that used to belong to the imperial family. Seeing the surprise on her face, he immediately explained everything to her. He said that this necklace was a very valuable gift, which the Empress had given to the current one, and he could not imagine how such an important thing could have ended up in her hands. One prick strongly advised her not to sell it under any circumstances, and to keep it in a very safe place or get rid of the necklace so that no one could find it and get to her through it. As soon as the man said these words, Ariel was very scared. His voice sounded incredibly ominous, trembling with fear. She thanked him for the advice and said that she would definitely use it. After this, Lloyd turned around and said that he would like to know a little more about the saint. However, he realized that, unfortunately, this was not destiny. He eventually said that he would try his luck next time and wish the saint safe travels, after which he simply left. Several hours passed since then, and Ryle returned to her temple and was incredibly excited after the events that had happened. She screamed while chatting with the gods and turned to Monty and asked how he dared to plant stolen jewelry on her at all. Monty eventually started to claim that whether it was stolen or not, it was still a work of art, so he didn't see any problem at all with all of this. But the girl laughed and said that she would definitely be executed or imprisoned for this custard thing, and she still didn't understand why he had slipped her a statue that didn't even have any value. But the god of art replied that since people did not appreciate the beauty of the statue, they were simply soulless roads, and the problem was not in him at all. In fact, Ariel spent a lot of francs on all 4 of these things, but in the end, due to the impossibility of selling the statue and the necklace, she earned only a small amount from them, and in the end, she only had losses. The girl thought that if only Lloyd hadn't interfered, she would have easily sold those 2 things. And in general, he was somehow strange that day. She didn't understand who would want to pay so much money just to get to know a person better. Ariel knew that Lloyd was definitely not the kind of person who would engage in unprofitable business or enter into unprofitable deals for himself. In the original stories, Cass Lloyd told Camilla that he would never take a losing deal because money always makes the world go round. But in the end, only he offered the best price. Ariel sighed heavily and thought that if she had agreed, she would have received a lot of profit. But she would still have done the same thing again if she had a choice. She also decided for herself that in the future, she would need to be more careful with things like this necklace. And she would also be interested in whether Lloyd would accidentally pawn her and set her up in this way. Then she decided to check the balance that she had. Of course, it was not such a large sum as she had expected. She couldn't even buy a barn with this money, let alone a store. Therefore, in the near future, Ariel could not even dream of escaping from the temple. She constantly doubted whether she should have agreed to that deal. And because of this, she felt even sadder. At some point, she even thought that perhaps she could return to the store and still accept Lloyd's offer. Despite the fact that the girl realized the fact that this was complete stupidity, she still thought about it. Ariel thought about what she should have said if she did come to him, for example, that she did agree to this deal, but the girl also understood the fact that if she did this, he would simply throw her out of the store and that's it. As soon as Ariel was about to return to her room, since she was in another one, she was very surprised when she went inside. And all because a Ray House appeared right in front of her. He saw the saint, greeted her, and asked if she had finally returned. Ariel had absolutely no idea what he was doing in her room and it scared her terribly. So for a while she just looked at him silently. But then the girl remembered her manners. She bowed and greeted his high priesthood. Ray House spoke to her immediately after that. He said that he had heard that she had been doing some very curious things lately and asked if he could find out why she had suddenly decided to save money for herself. He put his hand on her shoulder and asked if it was because she was planning to escape from the temple soon. As soon as she heard this, she became even more scared. Therefore, for some time, Ariel simply remained silent, trying to come up with a plausible answer. In fact, there were 3 main characters in the original story, and one of them was a swordmaster, a man with an icy heart but the best warrior of the Empire. He will completely devote himself to protecting Camilla, the main character of the novel. And that person was the Crown Prince Kyle and Lita, a tall, red-haired man who was really good at his job. The second hero was the owner of the Merchant Guild, the smartest man in the Empire who achieved success without even using his status as a marquis. Despite his prudence, he still fell in love with Camilla and was ready to give her the entire empire without even asking for anything in return. That man was the heir of the cheetah Lloyd Cass, and the last main character was the High Priest. This is a man with a strong sense of justice who, having met Camilla, began to pray with all his heart for her well-being, and it was certainly Ray House who was standing near Ariel at that moment. And these men were united by 2 things. Firstly, it was devoted love, of course, for Camilla. And secondly, they really hated Ariel, who was a false saint. As in all the novels, this place did not have a main male character that the villain would be interested in. So the last thread to salvation was buying a house, but even that was practically cut off from Ariel. So she didn't know what to do in this case. Ray House repeated his question again. He asked the girl if she was planning to escape from the temple. Ariel. At that moment, she was ready to even cry. She did not understand why everything in the original was not as confusing as now. She did not even know what to do in this situation. When he once again asked for an answer to the question, Ariel finally spoke to him and asked what exactly he meant, how the saint could leave the temple at all. She said that she was just thinking about buying a villa near the temple of Ariel and really hoped that this lie could save her and avoid a bad fate, at least for now. As soon as Ray House heard about this, he immediately asked, "Is this really true?" She needed a villa. The girl tried to sound as convincing as possible. She said that she certainly felt very comfortable in the temple, but Ariel explained that sometimes she wanted to be alone with her thoughts, and she thought that Ray House understood perfectly well what exactly she meant and therefore would not judge her. When she saw doubts on his face, she really hoped that he would believe her. And in the end, after some thought, the man agreed. Smiling, Ray House replied that sometimes it really is nice to spend time just the 2 of us. Ariel, who was happy about the fact that he agreed at first, didn't even pay attention to what exactly he said. And as soon as she realized that he was talking about the 2 of them, the girl immediately screamed loudly and asked why he thought that together meant alone. At that moment, the man suddenly laughed loudly and told the saint not to worry, because he understood what exactly she wanted. So he was going to try not to disturb her too much while being nearby. He said that he would also ask her to be careful when going outside. He thought that it would also be worthwhile to strengthen security by giving Dwayne a few more people, because at such a time, it could be very dangerous. The girl could not believe that he was saying all this seriously. She immediately said that she shouldn't have done this, because she didn't understand why she needed even more protection. But Ray House explained that this is all because she is a very important person, so it is impossible to allow even a small scratch to appear on her body. He stroked her hair and asked Ariel to be very careful. The girl did not understand his behavior at all, laughing nervously. She said that she thought that there was no need to worry so much about it. The high priest interrupted her and asked if it was true that she had just arrived and that she was very tired. So he said that he would not disturb her any longer and wished her a pleasant rest. After that, he didn't even say another word. He walked out the door and left Ariel completely alone to deal with all these thoughts now. The girl did not understand at all that this had happened, because El had never been such a character in the book, so his behavior now was extremely unusual for her. Most likely, it was all because of Odysseus. Ariel believed that it was he who had messed something up, and now everything had gone upside down. She thought that he had simply taken and trampled her dream of escaping and living the rest of her days carefree. Now the girl was in real despair because she didn't know how to get out of such situations. But then suddenly a notification came from God, who was talking with Odysseus. Odysseus said that he had absolutely nothing to do with all this. At that moment, Monty recommended that the girl start collecting flowers given to her by the high priest, and Heseth strongly advised that when choosing a gift, she should opt for receiving a share of the Cass Lloyd business. As soon as the girl read about all this, she was very shocked. She did not understand what they had done and assumed that these three would now treat her like Camilla in the original. And what's more, she didn't plan to take the place of the main character at all, so the girl was doubly angry. Although from the reader's point of view, all three were very attractive young people, but having become the villain Ariel, the girl had to only think about how to survive. And all because she doesn't want three swords to end up in her stomach at the same time. Because if she's not careful, that's exactly what will happen. And these gods were already dreaming of gifts for these men. She did not understand their logic at all, and therefore decided not to interfere in their conversations. Since then, several hours have passed. The sun has already begun to set beyond the horizon, and Ariel, in order to unwind a little, decided to go out into the city with her maid. Anna, who saw this whole festival that was happening around, was very delighted. She told the lady how beautiful everything was there. So she wanted the girl to also enjoy this moment. She took her hand and told her to go to different places. Ariel, as soon as she saw how happy she looked, was very happy. In fact, they ended up at the night market and the girls were very pleased to see their maid in such a pleasant mood. She correctly decided that she had escaped from the temple, at least for a short time. When Anna approached one of the stalls, she told Saint to look as soon as possible, because glass candies were sold there. As soon as they came closer and saw their reflection in the round candy, they were very amazed. After all, they really looked just like glass, and this made them even more surprised. The girls couldn't believe that the candies could really be so transparent, so Ariel asked the seller how much such a bag of candies would cost, and the man replied that the cost would be 1 franc. The girl immediately took 2 for herself and gave one of them to Anna. As soon as the maid saw this, she was pleasantly surprised. She did not expect that the mistress would decide to make such a big surprise for her. Ariel, who had already taken some candies, told the girl to try them immediately. After all, they were very sweet. Anna immediately said that the girl was incredibly caring about a simple servant like her, and that made her very happy. Ariel was very embarrassed and told her not to praise her so much anymore because it made her incredibly uncomfortable. But in fact, the girl, on the contrary, was incredibly happy that she could have fun like this carefree, without fear and without thinking about how she should have saved her life. But then suddenly, Anna became worried and asked if it was possible to buy them at all. Ariel, hearing such a strange question, immediately asked why she decided that it was impossible to do this. But the girl then explained that if the high priest knew that they had run out of the temple, he would be very angry. But the saint tried to calm her down and said that everything was fine. He was busy with guests now, so she was sure that he wouldn't even notice their absence. She also told Anna that she had borrowed her clothes, so no one would have thought that she was the saint, and accordingly, there was no one to give them to. Anna agreed with her and said that although these were simple clothes, the girl still looked incredibly beautiful in them. So she gave her several compliments. Ariel thanked her for this, but then suddenly she felt a little uncomfortable because she saw that not far from them, there were 2 men who had been following them all this time. The maid turned back and also saw them. She said that she also noticed it, but was afraid to say it. With a voice trembling with fear, she immediately asked the mistress what they were supposed to do now. Ariel suggested first luring them to a place where there were no people at all. As soon as Anna heard this, she was very surprised. She said that they might try to attack them and then they would be in big trouble. The girl smiled and said that she shouldn't worry. She had something prepared especially for such situations, so they definitely wouldn't be left without protection. In fact, at that time, the Ilium Rose Blooming Festival was taking place. It was a grand festival where any resident of the empire could enjoy the beautiful blooming of roses for a whole week. However, in order to attract even more attention from the public, and especially from young people, they decided to organize a second legend. This legend said that if you get married during the festival, the couple will live happily ever after. Because of this legend, many guys approached Ariel and Anya with marriage proposals. However, of course, the girls refused everyone, and in the end, two of these guys apparently could not come to terms with the refusal and decided to pursue them. As soon as Ariel and the girl turned into a rather deserted and dark alley, the men who continued to pursue them were very surprised by this and said that they were even more unusual than they thought. One of them smiled and asked in a rude and disgusting voice, "Is the girl really lost? Or maybe it's a peculiar way of giving consent to their previously discussed proposals." Ariel, at that moment, turned to the men and then suddenly smiled. Anna, in turn, was very scared. Such a situation brought her only discomfort and fear. But in fact, everything happened exactly as the saint had planned. She already wanted to turn to them, but did not have time. And all because the maid, having pushed the saint back, shouted loudly at them and asked, did he really not understand at all who was standing in front of him? But the guys just laughed because of this. He asked who she was. Was she really the daughter of some baron? The girl knew that there was no point in trying to pressure them with her status because she was dressed like a commoner. So under no circumstances would they believe her. The only way Ariel had was her own. So she turned to Anna and told her not to do it. Then suddenly, the reddish man laughed even louder. He turned to the girl and asked if this really meant that she had agreed to marry him. When Ariel came closer to him, he suddenly smiled again and said that she turned out to be more obedient than he thought. And also very beautiful, he assumed that she would be just the perfect wife for him. But Ariel interrupted him and said that the god of destruction once said one very wise thing. And that was exactly what she wanted to tell him. The phrase sounded like this: "Those who don't understand words need to be hit once, and then they will finally get it." Therefore, the girl activated her divine abilities and hit the man straight in the shoulder. And thanks to the increased strength, he couldn't even stand on his feet and fell to the ground. His friend was incredibly amazed. He couldn't believe that she did all this on her own. He had never seen such strength in a girl before. He immediately ran up to his friend and asked if he was even alive because the man himself was struck. He fainted and did not regain consciousness. Okay. As soon as I saw all this, I immediately ran up to the lady and said that she was very surprised. The girl simply threw him away like a little kitten. She asked the saint how she managed to do this, but Ariel, of course, did not answer her. She used the blessing of the gods, namely the power of Celia. She was very happy that she decided to pump up her control of power in advance, and now she could calmly control it and use it at any time convenient for her. When the partner saw that his friend had not regained consciousness at all, he became even more angry. He ran up to the girl and asked how she dared to attack him. He took his knife, which he had not even intended to take out until that moment, and was ready to hit her, but his plan failed. And all because out of nowhere another person appeared who injured this villain so badly that he even dropped his legs from his hands. Ariel turned her head to the side and saw who turned out to be her savior. This person was Lloyd. He smiled smugly. He said that he came to the festival to relax, and as a result, he was forced to waste his precious time getting rid of trash. As soon as the man who was wounded saw Ariel's defender, he immediately became scared and shouted loudly and asked who he was. But Lloyd wasn't even going to let him say a word. He walked up to him and kicked him right in the face. The man couldn't stay on his feet and fell to the ground again. He started calling them all names and calling them crazy, and he also said that he wouldn't let them get away with it so easily. So they would definitely pay for everything. He began to slowly run away from this alley. Blood was still flowing from his hand, but he shouted loudly and said that they should wait, he would return and take revenge. And this revenge would be incredibly terrible. Anna, as soon as she saw that he just took off and ran away, abandoning his partner, was very surprised. But she also exhaled with relief because she was still a little scared about it. Lloyd, seeing that everything was over, turned to the girl and asked if she was injured. Ariel immediately thanked him and said that she was okay, so he didn't have to worry. Then he suddenly looked at the person who continued to lie unconscious and said in a surprised voice that he certainly did not expect such strength from her. Ariel laughed nervously and said that she only pushed him slightly. She didn't even know why he couldn't stay conscious. The girl suggested that he most likely just drank a little too much, and for this reason he immediately felt sick. After this, the girl told the Marquis that she could not help but notice that his skills were simply incredible. He hit that man with a dagger so accurately that it really amazed her. Lloyd, a little embarrassed, said that in fact he had only poked at random. He didn't even know how he had managed to hit it so successfully and on time. The girl guessed perfectly well that he decided to mimic her, and because of this she felt even more uncomfortable being around this man. But the Marquis suddenly changed the subject of the conversation and asked why the girl was unprotected at such and such a time. He also added that he didn't think it was safe to walk alone in the streets in the evening. So he extended his hand to Ariel and asked her to let him escort her back to the temple. The girl simply had no choice. Of course she agreed to this, and walking next to the Marquis, the girl did not understand why in the end everything always went wrong for her. Anna even ran away, leaving them alone. She told the girl to enjoy this date properly, and she herself came up with the idea that she had many other things to do. Ariel was very upset about this because she hoped that at least the maid would stay and it would be less awkward for her to spend all this time with the Marquis. They walked through the city in silence for a while, but Lloyd turned to the girl and said that he did not expect that her maid could be so smart. But the saint sighed heavily and said that it seemed to her that it was the other way around. But she did not develop this topic any further.